Of the Acton Finance Committee to order. It has been made known to me that this meeting is being recorded by ActonTV. If anyone else is recording this, they need to make themselves known to the chair at this time. That being taken care of, we will move on to the first agenda item, which is public participation. Anyone who wishes to speak to something that's not already on the agenda, please let themselves be known now. If you're going to speak later at the articles, perfect, great. Very good. We're going to start. Our next item is the input on the warrant articles with regard to the Acton Boxborough Regional School District, and to that I turn it over to Superintendent Light and to Finance Director Vertolino with a short presentation.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having us.
Good evening, Peter.
So this is very conveniently located. Since I created the presentation, I have 3 screens that I can watch, and you evidently have none, so I apologize. It's a challenging meeting. But I am hoping to do a couple things tonight. One, give you a very brief overview of the operating budget. I know a lot of people are already familiar with that. But just give you a few of the talking points there. Talk a little bit about our capital planning process, but in particular with attention to the proposed bond that we'd like to request from the communities, as well as the stabilization fund, because I know there's some questions about that. So that's in a nutshell what we're planning to talk about tonight. In terms of the operating budget, we're proposing what it's my own term, it's kind of a moderate growth operating budget. We certainly recognize that our students have needs that continue to increase across the district, and we wanted to develop budgets that were both fiscally responsible, but also responsive to the needs of the students and the teachers across the district. We are proposing to add 8.6 full-time equivalent teaching positions that we categorized into 5 major areas. The first of those were what we call strategic additions that continue multi-year plans already in place. So for example, we had team chairs that we were adding at the elementary schools. Those were already approved in prior year's budgets. This is not something new that we came up with this year. We're just simply continuing multi-year plans. The other area that is a continuance of a multi-year plan was to continue adding science, technology, engineering, and mathematics coaches at the elementary level. So this is year 2 of those the STEM plan, and it's the final year of the elementary team position. So just to be aware of that. We also wanted to add support for the implementation of a capital plan. We did an extensive capital planning process really since 2015, which resulted this year finally in a capital plan that we can enact. But essentially what we're trying to accomplish over the next series of years is about a $21 million capital plan. We're also, as you are aware, moving forward with plans to construct a new school at the same time, and we have a very large operations, transportation, and maintenance department. We simply don't have the staff to be able to execute all of those programs simultaneously, so we proposed adding a capital projects manager to be able to do that and navigate the permitting and construction processes that we need to be able to support. We also talked about staff necessary to meet some of our students' needs, particularly around mental health and social emotional learning. The budget does propose adding staffing to support additional counseling supports at the high school, at the junior high school for a psychologist, as well as a wraparound services coordinator to be able to provide supports essentially to help a lot of our families who are in need of services connect with the various community organizations that can support that work. So that's something that we've put in the budget as well. We also wanted to, we had a full-time nurse at I believe the junior high school it was, and we had funded that position through a grant previously to the tune of about $60,000 of that person's salary. The nursing grant requirements have changed this year, and you can no longer use that grant for salaries, so we have to assume that cost in the budget because we still need the nurse at the junior high school. And then finally, we shifted a number of resources around in the district. To us, even though we knew we needed to grow staffing, we didn't want to grow staffing always by adding FTEs. We wanted to figure out where we could shift our existing resources. So we have 2 examples I can highlight for you of that. One was shifting funds from our custodial sub account. We were paying time and a half to hire custodians to sub for people who were ill or injured long term, and we realized that we could actually add a floating custodian at a fraction of the cost that we were paying time and a half for substitute custodians. So that's one example of shifting resources. Another is the high school is changing its schedule next year, and the band director will no longer be able to serve the high school and the junior high schools effectively within a day. But we realized that we were paying pretty substantial stipends at each elementary school for outside band directors to come in just to teach the morning band program. If we consolidated all of those stipends, we could actually offset the cost of hiring a full-time band director to serve the elementary and junior high schools. So it was a combination of adding some new positions, but also shifting our resources around to achieve that 8.6 FTE number that you're seeing, or not seeing, that I'm seeing. The second major area that we focused on in developing this budget was to support the district's work around equity. This is a core value of the district. It's also been a goal of the school committee and the district for a number of years now. We wanted to continue that work. A couple things that we're doing. One, we recognize that we have increasing numbers of students who are economically disadvantaged in both of our communities. Right now, we've gone, I think, in the last decade from about 2.5% of our student population requiring free or reduced lunch services to over 10% of our student population receiving free and reduced price lunch. We recognize that that presents a challenge for those families to be able to access a lot of the programs that we have in the schools. Particularly school supplies can be a challenge, as well as field trips and a lot of the activities that we do at our schools. So we're doing two things. One, all elementary schools next year will be paying the cost of school supplies within the operating budget. Screensaver kicked in. So that will be assumed in the operating budget for elementary schools. Many of the elementary schools already did it. I believe a little more than half already were doing that. We're just making sure that all elementary schools cover school supplies moving forward. And then we're also creating a field trip assistance fund at each elementary school, where for each student who receives free and reduced price lunch, we're putting $100 into a field trip account for that principal to be able to offset costs for families, so that students can access field trips the same as many of our more advantaged families can do currently. So that's some of the work around equity. We're also planning to partner with the Anti-Defamation League, which is a nationally recognized organization to promote anti-bias education through a peer leader program that will be focused at the high school level. And then the third string of the proposed budget is to create and implement a capital plan. We're coming to the community with about a $21 million capital plan that proposes to bond $7.5 million to increase the district's annual operating budget proportionally over the 12 years of the plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But then also the establishment of a stabilization fund to make sure that we have sufficient reserves to cover any costs that come up either surprised or, as you'll see later in the plan, we have some very large expenses that would exceed what we're able to cover in any annual operating budget, and we need to be able to save along the way to execute those so that we don't have to continue to take out debt long term. We'd rather take our money, save it, and stop paying interest, but right now we have to be able to do that because we just don't have the money we need to execute the plan. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. This is, again, just a broad overview of the budget. You've probably seen this slide in some format, but what we're proposing is a $90,982,111 budget, which is an overall increase of 2.55%, and the Acton percent change is 2.09. We are using some of our E&D to balance that budget. It's targeted primarily into the area around capital, but we're also adding 2 buses, so we're offsetting some of the cost of adding those buses with the E&D funds. But we were particularly sensitive this year, knowing that the Acton reserves have been declining over the last few years, and we felt as though we wanted to make sure that we could have a fairly low increase as a portion of percentage and use what E&D we could do to help balance that budget. So 2.09 is the Acton assessment percent. Do you want me to pause for questions on the operating budget or just go through the whole thing?
Go through it, and then we'll ask you at the end, please.
Okay. This is just a brief history. I'm not going to go through the whole slide, but this is just illustrating that the capital plan development has been a long time coming. The district in FY15 was budgeting $155,000 a year toward capital. That was the year we commissioned the Dorr and Whittier study, which identified we all know about $120 million in projects. We'll get to all of that. There's been...
We need a picture that shows level of happiness of the FinCom.
Right. Yeah.
Frown.
A frown and then hopefully a smile at the end. That's why it's green. You know, we all like to smile at green.
Could have rounded.
Every once in a while, we're right about something.
Yeah.
We could have rounded it. We could have rounded it.
Broken clock strikes twice a
Okay,
day.
capital.
Yeah, that's right.
We could have rounded it to 0, I guess.
Yeah, round, right, we'll just round. This year, the district was up at $1 million. What we're proposing to do is increase that to $1.25 million next year. And then what we're really looking to do is actually a 12-year commitment. So next year, our intent is to go to $1.25 million. The following year, we'd like to increase that to $1.5 million. And then once we hit the $1.5 million threshold, what we'd like to do is continue to increase that capital budget by 2.5% per year for the remainder of the life of the plan. That will result at the end of the plan in approximately $2 million a year as part of the district's annual capital budget. In our capital subcommittee, we talked about what's the appropriate outlay, and the industry standard seems to be about 1% of the assessed value of your properties as your capital outlay. Right now, we're at 82 million. However, we're bringing a fairly large building project online while this capital plan will be happening. So we're estimating about $200 million as the assessed value as soon as the building project comes online. So we feel like the $2 million threshold is an appropriate threshold to be able to get to long term. As I said, you know, as we developed this capital plan, we needed to think in multiple buckets. And this is a slide that the district has used over time, but we thought in short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. In the short term, that was the increase in the operating budget from $1 to $1.25 million. In the medium term, what we needed to really do is take a look at the various projects that we needed to accomplish and make sure that we had honed the Dorr and Whittier list from 120 million to an appropriate number that we could execute. We also needed to put those into a sequence of the importance and the timelines that we believe should be executed. We also needed to then come up with a funding strategy because we knew that regardless of what the number was, it exceeded what we had available to us. So that was certainly important to do. In the long term, we knew that the Douglas Gates project is obviously on the horizon. That probably actually could get moved into the medium term at this point, hopefully. But then we also know that the Conant building project was removed from consideration. Something will need to happen at Conant in the long term. The administration building and the maintenance shed are both excluded right now because both of those need major plans and they were beyond what we could tackle in a given period of time to be able to get to those. So just to keep those on the radar that something has to be done with those. We don't know what we want to do right now. We had 4 prongs that we tried to attack the capital plan with. One I just talked about was defining the project scope and sequence and make sure that that was an accurate list of projects and the associated costs were reasonably close to what we should anticipate. We needed to increase our operating budget to a point where we could actually continue to cover costs of capital improvements long term and ensure adequate funding. We needed to look at a borrowing strategy because we just didn't have the cash available to complete the projects that were deemed high priority at this time, nor would the cash be available to us on an annual basis if we just stuck with the operating budget. And then finally, we needed to ensure the long-term stability of this program to make sure that if a boiler fails at a major building in 5 years that wasn't on the capital improvement list, then we had some kind of a funding source to be able to go back to. And we also needed to look at some of the more long-range projects. The $120 million, I think, got stuck in everyone's mind early on when Dorr and Whittier came forward with that. So I want to just briefly go over how we got from 120 million to what we're proposing is 21 million, essentially. Dorr and Whittier engaged in a comprehensive master planning process with the district where they did not only identification of projects that needed to be completed, but they actually studied kind of a visioning process for what the district and schools might want to do educationally over the long term. So what that resulted in is it gave us a great list of projects that we were able to start applying to MSBA for, and that's the best example is the Douglas and Gates project. But it also included a lot of items that were really not essential. So one item that stood out to me in looking at the list, I believe, was relocate the high school locker rooms. Why? We don't need to relocate the high school locker rooms. It's a huge expense in the capital plan, but it's certainly not necessary in order to ensure the stability of that building. that's one example, but there are certainly other examples in there that we just don't deem necessary. We also found a number of projects that were redundant. So for example, there might be in one area of the Doran Whittier report, it would say, you should repair the flashing on the west wing of the roof at the Parker Damon building. You should secure the ladder on the roof at the Parker Damon building. You should look at the flashing on the east side of the roof at the Parker Damon building. Oh, and by the way, replace all the roof and the flashing. And each of those projects was estimated separately, so they actually became redundant in that $120 million figure. And then finally, a lot of their cost estimates were quite frankly just high. We knew we wanted to renovate the bathrooms at Blanchard. Those were a very substantial figure. I don't know the exact number, but I believe it was almost $100,000 in bathroom renovations at Blanchard. We've completed about half of them already, and we've spent about $8,000 because we're doing it in-house with our own staff. So there's substantial cost savings that we can realize from a lot of that work. Those were the issues in the Doran Whittier report. We actually contracted with Skanska, who also happens to be our OPM for the school building project. They do both construction management and project management, so they're a great firm to be able to do some of this work for us. But we actually had them work with JD Head in the operations department to hone and go through every project on the $120 million Doran Whittier report and identify which projects needed to be completed. So they removed the projects at Douglas and Gates. They removed Conant because the immediate work that needed to be done at Conant now has been done. So that is stable and now just needs a future determination. They removed the maintenance shed and they removed most of the projects in the admin building, although there are still a few projects that are in the capital plan. They took out the redundancies, they took out the wish list items. We had already completed a lot of the work since the Doran Whittier study, so they took out all those projects. They also, when Doran Whittier wrote the report, they had included many projects that are actually just ongoing preventative maintenance that we do on an annual basis, replacing fan belts in heating systems, things like that. And then they updated the cost estimates to what they thought were realistic, working in conjunction, and that resulted in the $20.8 million number that we came forward with. I just wanted to make sure we're clear about where we got that number from. This is just a quick slide. I'll show you. This is how we're increasing our commitment to capital through our operating budget. Again, FY15, $125,000, best rounded to zero. And where we're at now, going into next year, is in green, which is a $250,000 increase from this year. We're proposing next year for FY21 another $250,000, and then what we're showing is over the remaining 12 years of the plan, getting to just about that $2 million threshold. Some of the key funding details in order to execute this capital plan. We need to increase the operating budget. I've already talked about that. We also had a goal through borrowing to make the funding available for our highest priority projects within the first 2 to 3 years of this plan. Our bonded amount is a great topic of discussion. It's a long discussion. I'm not going to go into all of it, but essentially we needed to balance priorities. One priority was making sure we could get to our highest priority projects, but the other priority was we needed to come up with a number that we could actually comfortably repay within our district's operating budget and not have to seek a debt exclusion to pay. So it does take some finesse to get to that. It turns out $7.5 million was just about the number that we could borrow and complete the work we needed to, and also make sure we could repay within the operating budget and not jeopardize the long-term financial health of the district in our estimation. The bond plus the budget that we're allocating, so again, the $7.5 million plus the $1.25 million this year, $1.5 million next year, makes us about $10 million available for projects over the first few years of this plan, 2 to 3 years, and then another $10 million through our operating budget in years 3 through 12 of the plan. The debt is repaid through the operating budget. This does not require a debt exclusion. I hinted at that in bold red. It required approval of the school committee. The school committee has now approved that, but it also requires a 2/3 vote at both the Acton and Boxborough annual town meetings to authorize the district taking on that debt. We believe it allows us to identify our highest priority projects in the next 2 years and maintains capacity within our operating budget moving forward for newly identified projects. We did reserve about $100,000 a year early in the plan and increased to $200,000 a year later in the plan. Projects that building principals identified, operations identified, because we knew we couldn't tie ourselves up long-term with just what's on the capital list right now. We also, within the capital plan, and if you look at the detail that's available on our website about it, you can actually see that 4 years from now, we will go through another comprehensive planning process to update the plan, and then we're also planning that for about year 10 of the plan. So this is really about an ongoing planning process, not just a one-time hit. This has also been shared in various formats. This is just showing details of the bond repayment. I don't know if you've all seen this before. I won't stay on this too long, but we are choosing a level principal repayment schedule so that we can do two things. One, decrease the amount of debt and the interest we're paying over time, but also pay more upfront so that in later years of the plan we have greater financial flexibility within the operating budget. This is a chart that we talked about quite a bit, and if you look over here, this last column is, to me, the important column on this, because this is what do we have left after we've budgeted and allocated money into the operating budget for capital and after we pay our debt service down. What's going to be left for projects? We have several years of this plan early on after we've gone through the short-term borrowing process and we issue the bonds and begin repaying them, where you can see the amount available for projects dips low, and that was one of the concerns that some of our committee members in the capital subcommittee had raised with us, which actually led to our developing the last part of this process, which was development of a stabilization fund, because what we can do is actually set aside some money now to be able to address this in future years of the plan, to keep this at about the $800,000 level per year by setting aside some money now, and that levels off what we'll have available for projects. This is just, this actually doesn't impact the debt that we're intending to take on for capital projects, but we did want to show the debt service repayment schedule for the district because we know we also have the building project coming online in a few years. We're hitting at a relatively favorable time, even though we're a little bit early. We don't want to delay the capital plan by 5 years because we're going to just end up with more items and a bigger bill if we try and delay the borrowing on this any further. But we are starting to retire some of our debt coming up in the next few years. I'm going to talk now about the stabilization fund because I just did a little bit of a segue in there. So in 2016, the legislation changed, which allowed regional districts to enact stabilization funds. And the DESE advisory that came out, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, indicated very clearly that any use of a stabilization fund should be based on the district's long-range capital plan. So we feel like we're very much in line with that philosophy that was put forward for the use of a stabilization fund. Our auditors in the most recent audit, and I think we already forwarded these reports to you earlier in the year, but the quote was they believed that the stabilization fund was a prudent means of capital budgeting and strategically targeting the financial reserves in an appropriately transparent manner. And I'm going to show you a couple slides to try and be transparent about how we intend to use those funds. It also carries with it the potential to augment our resources that were in the capital improvement plan. And addresses the concerns about those lean years where we're starting to repay the bond and we have higher bond repayment. In order to establish the stabilization fund, and you may already know this, but I figured I'd go through some of the nuts and bolts for everyone, it does require a majority vote of the school committee, which was already done, and the stabilization fund requires a majority vote at both town meetings. So the taking on debt was the 2/3 vote at the town meetings. Stabilization fund is a majority vote at both meetings. In order to put money into a stabilization fund, there are really two processes available to the district. One is to appropriate that money through a regular operating budget proposal, which obviously then goes to town meeting and is approved through the normal manner. There are years, which I can show you, where we're already intending to be appropriating money into a stabilization fund so that we can save for the expensive projects at the end of the play. Excuse me. But the other process is a budget amendment, which requires a 2/3 vote of the regional school committee. We are proposing
to put in somewhere around $1 million into the stabilization fund at the end of this year. We gave our Q2 financial update, and we've been talking as well at ALG about that. Right now, we are about 1.4 million to the good in the operating budget. That came as a result of better health insurance rates than anticipated. We have had about, I believe, 29% of our employees, I think you said, go into the high deductible plan this year. We also had a significant return from the OPEB. Not OPEB, the Health Insurance Trust, that allowed us to be very favorable in health insurance and in expenses. A lot of those have been employee expenses. I think you've talked in past years about looking at the level of conservatism that the district used in budgeting. That's something that has been about an 18-month process in the making, and the budget we proposed actually closed a lot of the gaps. So we anticipate next year having fewer resources available at the end of the year, but this is a favorable year to be able to establish a stabilization fund. So that will require 2/3 vote. We want to be transparent that we're looking somewhere around $1 million, so it's very clear and upfront with everybody. As soon as the school committee does that, we anticipate that that will be in June, simply because we need to make sure that we know how much money is really left in the budget at that point before we start appropriating it to different places. That's kind of an important step. At that point, the school committee needs to provide notice to both communities within 7 days, and the selectmen in each community have an opportunity to call a town meeting if they want to get a vote to disapprove that budget appropriation. So if the selectmen choose not to take a vote, or the vote continues that the budget amendment's approved, then the transfer goes through, and it's 45 days after the notification. So just to be clear about that process.
Peter, the selectmen have 7 days to make up their mind, but 45 days to conduct the town meeting.
No.
They have, that school district has 7 days to tell the board of selectmen. The board of selectmen then have 45 days to.
Right.
Saying, it came up with Minuteman a few years ago. It's 45 days to hold a meeting if you're going to hold a meeting.
Right. Yeah, they need to determine to
You're right.
Yep.
do that, yeah. Appropriating from a stabilization fund requires a 2/3 vote of the school committee. It has to be for any purpose for which borrowing is permitted. That's the language in the stabilization fund legislation. You can only borrow money for capital projects, is the way if you really look carefully at what the definition of borrowing is. So it really limits to capital purposes. There is a clause in the legislation that says, or any other purpose that's approved by the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. That is really for extraordinary circumstances. You could potentially see some scenario where the district had nothing left in excess and deficiency, and there were a number of maybe high-priced special education out-of-district tuition placements at the end of a year, and the district didn't have the reserves to cover it in E&D, so they needed to apply to the commissioner to use the stabilization fund. It's possible. I can't tell you that's not possible, but we see it as highly, highly unlikely because we've tried to establish a good track record over the years of having enough in excess and deficiency to cover those extraordinary expenses. Some other key points. Accounting is similar to other capital projects where it's in a separate fund. It does carry over from year to year. The funds in stabilization do not impact E&D, so the district can and likely will go over that 5% reserve capacity. I'll talk about that in a minute. And any interest earned does stay in the fund. In terms of reserve capacity, obviously the district has a 5% cap on E&D. With the stabilization fund, you can exceed that overall. Interestingly, Moody's has actually talked to Dave. He forwarded, I think, the information to you earlier today about Moody's, that they see this as a favorable thing for the long-term bond rating of the district. One of the reasons that we're AA2 and not AAA was actually our current reserves are lower than the national average for regional school districts. The reason we're lower than the national average is not every state has a cap on E&D the way that Massachusetts does, so that does not paint us in the most favorable light nationally. This will certainly help our position, and we feel that, especially going into bonding for the new school, we want to be in the most favorable position to have the lowest interest rates possible on the best terms. So that's something we certainly want to watch. We also are working with the school committee, and we're working with them so that this current year, we're anticipating that they'll actually develop policies around the use of stabilization and excess and deficiency and how to treat year-end funds. What we're targeting with school committee is that excess and deficiency should be somewhere between 4 and 4.5%. Of the district's operating budget. We also want to have a policy about, when they might transfer money into a stabilization fund at the end of a year. There are some districts also that use stabilization funds to be able to save for projects like field lighting, so they might take revenues from field usage and put that into a stabilization fund of some kind so that they can replace their turf fields and lights on a schedule and be able to save for things like that. So we're not 100% there on that aspect of it, but that's certainly something that we could see doing because, again, we want to make sure we have the money available to execute the projects that need to be done when they need to be done. But we want to do it in a very transparent manner as well. The next couple of slides, anticipating some of the questions I heard, I wanted to show you how the stabilization fund might work. So in yellow, it's kind of when we would intend to use money from the stabilization fund and how that might look. When we're transferring into the stabilization fund, and then what is our starting balance. So as I said before, we're intending to put in about $1 million this first year. And as I had shown you in the debt repayment schedule, we know that there's lean years coming forward where we need to have money available to be able to fund projects that we need to do in those years. So we're intending to use, to the tune of $300,000 to $400,000 out of that stabilization fund over the first, 3, 4, 5, and 6 years of the program. In the later stages of the program, you can see at the very end here, this actually represents the Parker Damon roof that needs to be replaced. It does not need to be replaced now, but we know in a decade it will need to be replaced. That's about a project that's north of $4 million to do. That would exceed our ability to pay for it in a fiscal year. So what we need to do is make sure there's enough in the stabilization fund to fund that project when we get there. So in year 8, 9, and 10, and then again in 12, you can see that we're actually anticipating that through the operating budget, we'll budget money going directly into the stabilization fund so that it's available to us around about year 13. This is a plan. Some of the years could shift one way or the other. Sometimes projects shift a little bit, but what we wanted to do is be transparent a decade out about, why do we need a stabilization fund to be able to offset some of these costs, but how might we be using that and what's our intent going in. This is all building. Jason, I don't know if you want me to talk about building project at all or not.
No.
Then, in that case, questions. I figured I'd rather have more information than you need.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Sure.
you coming. I'm going to go around the table and then I'll just stop on me and ask any last questions that I have. Might as well start over here with Dave. Do you have any questions on this?
Thanks for the presentation, very informative. I was curious that you talked about the restrictions at the state level and how I think you said that it's limited to capital projects, so whatever you could issue debt for
Yeah.
is what this fund would be limited to. Can you just be a little more explicit about what those boundaries are? Because in the past, like the town is a stabilization fund, and sometimes it gets a little squishier what the actual use is from the town version, maybe the school's just different.
This is fairly new legislation. It's only a little more than 2 years old, and the difference is from your stabilization fund, you need town meeting action to expend from it. There doesn't need to be town meeting action as long as the selectmen are, let's just say, on board with it. They can simply say, yep, we're good with it, we're not going to call a town meeting, and it's approved. So the trade-off is you can't use it for anything. You can't put away money for things that don't relate to capital projects. And the legislation reads for which you can borrow, and we interpret that to mean capital projects.
Yeah, but do you have any clear definition around what constitutes a capital project? I think that was your request. So
For that purpose.
I think it's about the lifespan.
Typically borrowing has to do with lifespan.
I think, so the newer legislation around, is it just limited to schools?
Yeah, regional school
Stabilization?
districts.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe the wording is just different, that's just what I'm not familiar with, and then to your point, maybe that's very different than what a town could have in their stabilization fund.
Town can put away money for any purpose.
Okay,
You can use it to reduce the tax rate. But in your budget vote, you'd need a 2/3 vote to
Right.
pass it if it was an omnibus budget.
This is specifically a capital stabilization fund
gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's how the
for
legislation.
regional school
Gotcha.
districts. Yeah.
The language doesn't call it a capital stabilization fund. We talked about this recently. We chose to call it that just, again, for the optics of this is the purpose. It's not intended to be put away as an adjunct E&D. It's to put away to help fund the capital plan.
Gotcha. Great, and then, the other question I had is just you showed the debt servicing and, obviously there's a lot of years and there's paying down principal over a lot of those years. And it's still a little early, but I was wondering if you've done some preliminary work on the new schools, and then if you look at that medium to long-term plan, and maybe the longer-term plan has a maintenance shed or administration building or a new cone school or whatever they are, those are far out and to be discussed by the town, obviously. But the twin school at Douglas Gates is relatively on the front burner. And do you have sort of an idea what the debt servicing may look like? I'm sure you do. And we don't need to get into the weeds on it at all.
We're gonna spend all of November discussing that. So, I don't think it's appropriate for tonight because we're gonna be running late.
Fair.
But your question is totally valid, and we will get you more information on it in the near future.
Great.
Do you have anything else with regard to these articles that are going to be facing us for this town meeting? Great. Tom?
I'd just like to thank you for a very good and detailed presentation and commend you really for the long-term forward analysis that you did. I really don't have any questions, and unless I'm missing something, I thought it was very well thought out and reasonable.
Thank you. I mean, there was a lot of years that went into getting to this point of kind of careful budgeting and thought and getting the community prepared for the fact that there's a pretty hefty price tag on the work.
Yep.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you.
I second what Tom said. It's fantastic.
Steve?
Excuse me, Christie, everything okay? We communicated back and forth about.
That's
yeah.
Christine. This is Christine.
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
Oh, Dave, it was going so well.
We didn't bring our name tags.
Where's the back button? Is there a back button?
And my oldest daughter's name is Christine, so.
So you haven't,
Yeah.
maybe convinced her yet. But I'm the one who comes to all your meetings.
Yeah,
I apologize.
yeah.
I think the word was fantastic. Is that the word I used?
All right.
All those things.
I'm good.
So, a couple of years ago, as a member of the Joint Capital Planning Committee that ceased to meet, I made quite a study of this. It was a hobby for a few years. And I must admit that basically what you've come up with, other than the stabilization fund, which I didn't anticipate, is kind of the way I saw it would have to be done. You could not get to everything that Dore and Whittier identified without some sort of bonding for the CIP. So I'm happy to see that's getting accomplished. One thing, I understand turnbacks as a funding mechanism for 1 year. Now, what happens year 2 and 3 and 4 if we're tightened down our budgets? Are we still going to have an excess of $1 million every year, or is that when you get into the appropriating it within the assessments?
Yeah, I think, one, we're showing you some years where we anticipate that we will definitely be appropriating within the assessments. I think, I think in terms of turnbacks, I can't foresee a time when the district would be closer than like 1% within its operating budget at the end of the year, maybe 0.5%. I mean, if you get below 1% of your operating budget, you're starting to tread on dangerous ground. So, there always will be some money at the end of a fiscal year. I think at that point, again, what we're trying to do, we want to work with our school committee to actually develop policies that can guide future school committees and future administrations around how we balance money going into E&D, turnbacks, and stabilization, because we don't want stabilization to be an infinite savings account. We want to have enough money in there to anticipate the unanticipated expenses that we could incur, boilers, roofs that fail, things like that just have to be done. We need some money for that. We also need to save for future projects and be able to track that kind of in line items within the stabilization account. But at that point, again, it's not just about keeping funding it infinitely. So I think
Can I
it still
just add
requires some
something?
thought, but that's a policy forthcoming.
The
Yeah.
other part we talked about is, now we have a clear idea of the projects and the timing and the order and priorities. We will be finding alternative funding sources for some of the work. And so as that happens in
That's a
those
great point,
years,
yeah.
some of that money will be able to go to stabilization. And DOER has been a great source, the energy projects.
Yep.
We've already applied to MSBA for an accelerated repair project for Blanchard.
Yep.
We don't know if that's gonna come through, but sometime in this window, we're likely to get some funding from them for one of the bigger projects. So any of that, ComEd does some things, so.
Okay. And just one more question and a comment. Dave, Brian, if either one of you could get me the DOR guidelines on what you can bond, what the language says, I'd like to see it.
Sure.
Comment is, be real clear when you make your pitch on stabilization that it's not the same as the towns. Because we have a glossary of terms in the back of the warrant that defines the stabilization fund the way it is defined by the town, and yours is not. So
Yours is as defined, I presume, by Mass General laws.
2/3 to put it in and 2/3 to take it out. So
Right.
you'll be talking about something very different and you
It's
need to make-
it's very similar with that one proviso at the
Big
end
change, yeah.
that you don't have to have a
Right.
town meeting.
So I'm just saying, if anybody reads the warrant and
So
anybody,
that's a good point, maybe we
anybody
should-
sees stabilization fund and they look in the glossary, they're not gonna see the definition that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Christie?
All right, I'm sorry, I've been taking notes on clerk.
Yeah.
So I know that you described some of this, and I didn't fully get it to stay in my
Yeah.
head. Could you please discuss, my understanding is that money can be either put in through the budget amendment or as a budget line item to go into the stabilization fund. And I thought 2/3 of the school committee needed to agree to take it out. Is that correct? Okay, so it's unlike our stabilization fund in that it's only 2/3 of a small group of people as opposed to 2/3 of two largest group of people in two towns.
In a region, the school committee is the appropriating authority,
Yes.
whereas in the town, it's the town meeting.
Yes.
There's just that
But
there's the backstop of if it was an egregious, seen as an egregious use of these resources by either town, the Board of Selectmen could determine to have a disapproving vote by either or both town meetings.
Oh, sorry, I think our job is to partially look at how this could go. I don't think you guys are gonna be socking away. Because as we discussed earlier, the limit on what you can put into this count is ridiculous.
Large.
6
Yes.
billion, right?
Yeah.
5% of 6 billion.
It's,
My calculator doesn't go to
Yeah.
billions, so it only said 300,000 was the answer, but I said, oh, but that's 300 million. That's, yeah, we'll stop short of that.
if we got there, it'd be bigger than a 2.09%.
There you go.
Yeah,
You wouldn't get there in the 2.5.
yeah. Not while I'm alive.
How do you decide on an ongoing basis what projects you think are going into this? You have a wonderful plan, and that all sounds reasonable right now in terms of what the budgeting request will be going forward, but
Into what actually gets done on an annual basis.
SIP plan, is what she's
Yeah.
asking about. She's asking about how the SIP plan is reviewed every year and has its own underlying
Okay,
committee.
sorry, when you said SIP, there's another term in education around
Capital
SIP, being school improvement plans, and that's all.
Capital improvement plan.
Yep.
the committee
Okay.
that this keeps in
So we have the capital subcommittee, that's actually an ongoing committee, and that's members of the school committee, school administration, and one of the finance committee members from each town. And so that was the group that actually took a look at what the project scope and sequence we had proposed through Skanska, and through our operations department, but that's also the group that we're planning to come back to basically quarterly as we move forward and be able to get community input as well.
Now, is that tied in with the budgeting requests around the stabilization fund also?
Yes, it is. And so I showed you the first 5 rows of the stabilization, of the capital improvement plan. Under it is actually a detailed list of every project that's planned over 13 years.
And we've got the projects laid out for the whole time,
Yeah.
every 13 years. And of course, they'll be reviewed every year.
Well, and stuff will come up.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so we actually started with the projects, and then the numbers we needed added up from the projects that we had planned, as opposed to starting with the money and work down.
Now, it's new, as we discussed, this idea of actually putting away enough money every year to keep maintaining things. And I understand
Right.
the idea of using a bond to accelerate that. So in my understanding, we're going to get caught up on all the
That's-
stuff we should have been doing, and then we have the money going forward, the line items will be
Right.
towards that. And then the stabilization fund will be to sock that extra away for when the big projects.
Exactly, and our buildings will continue to age throughout the duration of the plan, so other items will come forward and we'll need to continually reevaluate it. But yeah,
I have to say, I'm still a little uncomfortable with the idea that the money for these large projects comes down to just the school committee. I know we elect them to represent us, but it's having to convince 5 people, no, it isn't, it's 11 of them?
11.
It's 11, but then you have to worry about the weighted voting.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. As opposed to, for a fire station, you have to go to the whole town. Y'all are a really big percent of our budget.
So the money going in could go to town meeting, and if it's part of the annual appropriation, it would be part of the annual town meeting.
It would,
In this case, it's the year-end funds we're looking to
Yes.
use, so that's why we're not comfortable doing that in
Oh.
February, March, right?
but it would be rolled into the school budget. It's not a separate line item.
Correct.
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 Because we have in our budget,
Right.
we want to do these things, and then we still go to town meeting and say, okay, this is why,
Right.
in our overall budget. So this is really, this
Right.
is largely removed from the people who are paying for it.
Yeah, it is, and I hear where you're coming from, and I think that's a really fair point. I think, the difference might be like something on the scope of a fire station, there's gonna be debt repayment that has to happen, that can exceed 2.5 on something like that. Anything on that magnitude, we certainly have to go to both communities for as well, with the 2/3 vote. So, it's limited somewhat in scope, but I hear where you're coming
But her
from.
point is valid, that in the 13th
Yep.
year, you're gonna be taking out more than they're gonna be taking out 4+ million.
That's
from the
right.
roof.
Yep.
And normally, we'd have another bite at the apple to say yay or nay. And
Right.
that last backstop is now in the hands of the school committee instead. So
Yes.
it's a valid point.
Yep,
And
I
keep in mind, I have
Yeah.
school-age children, but I also hope to be in this town for the rest of my life. And
Yep.
looking at the fact that the population, a lot of them only marginally benefit from how good our schools are.
right,
And it's 2/3 of our budget
Mm-hmm.
goes towards this. So I want to make sure that we're maintaining that broader view, that the school is part of the community. It's not just a building
sure.
that's handed over.
As a practical matter, this is my second year. I sit in the audience with Brian at ALG meetings. Things don't happen financially in a vacuum at the regional school district. There's a tremendous amount of cooperation and sharing of information and team approach in solving the budget problems for both the district and the 2 towns. I can't imagine, again, for what it's worth, in year 2 of my career, and I'm probably not going to be around in year 13 of this plan.
Oh, yeah.
I can't imagine a situation in which the district would attempt to take out money for something with you folks, ALG, your representatives in the other, being opposed to it.
That's still different.
That's not, it's not in the law,
Yeah.
but as a practical matter, the structure that you have in place is a tremendous spirit and evidence of teamwork in solving the financial problems.
That's still different from having to go in front of the public at town meeting.
Yep,
That's-
it is.
So this is asking us to hand over even more power from the people for a significant budgetary item for us in general.
Sure.
Do you have any other questions?
Let me check. It sounds like there aren't really other funding options than the stabilization fund.
The district actually has a transportation stabilization fund. How many years ago was it? 3 or 4 years
I
ago?
think she's asking for capital, though.
No.
Other
For-
funding options for capital.
Things like, we're planning for needing the new roof, I can't remember which school.
Dr. Damon?
Okay,
We could take out a bond, certainly, when we want to, but then it's just paying interest.
MSBA.
On something.
Which we applied
Yep.
for. And if that happens, then that money can get reallocated to the other capital.
and the other thing you'd said was that the stabilization fund helps us with our Moody's rating, which helps us get better interest rates on our loan when we go to do the twin school. What range better are we talking about? I have no.
So we're now at what's called a AA2. There's 2 steps above that. What is the difference? I honestly can't tell you, because I don't know. I'm not an analyst. Could it be 0.25%? Let's just say hypothetically, if it's 0.25%, and Acton's share is, let's say, I'm doing this in my head,
85 million.
50. Well, after MSBA, say
60?
60 million, divided by 20
to
is
70?
3 million.
60 to 68, Jason. It's
Yeah.
on the slide.
60 million, and a
Yeah.
quarter of a percent, say 150 grand a year. If it's 0.25% difference, that's worth it. 150,000.
Yeah, in some ways. Thank you.
Sure.
It's about a 15 basis point differential between a AA rated and a AAA rated muni bond.
What's your source?
This is on FMS bonds.
For those of us who don't remember what that means, what is it at this point?
Oh, it's 100.
It's 100.
So it's 100. It's 100.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
But
15
that
basis points
moves
between
around.
the two,
Well,
AA?
it's AA flat and AAA.
Okay.
Subject to change if interest rates get
Sure.
steeper.
Right.
Al, do you have any questions for him?
First off, great presentation. I'll echo Steve's sentiment on kind of using the stabilization fund as a misnomer. I make sure that's extra clear. I guess obviously Moody's thinks that a stabilization fund would be a net positive, but is there a risk of an NRSRO downgrade to not having one?
Likely not.
That's it.
Mike?
Given everything, all the other things that are positive outlook that the district has experienced.
But the absence isn't going to hurt us.
I wouldn't think.
Great.
Yeah, I think this was an excellent presentation, and it demonstrated a lot of forward thinking and different thinking, which was good. Using strategies like hiring Skanska, firms like that, can really, in the long run, save you time as well as potentially millions of dollars. We were using Skanska as the architectural project manager at Minuteman.
Yeah.
And, it's just amazing. But in this, the stabilization fund strategy seems like it's really innovative in that it's able to make sense of that original Dory Whittier mind-boggling number. It made the plan possible by cutting it into smaller pieces, understanding it, reducing redundancies, things like that, seeing what's doable, what's not doable, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So I think we're moving forward. It sounds like a very good plan, and it looks like you're in charge. My other question is, with regard to MSBA projects, their timetables are pretty strict and pretty tight. Is there any concern about meeting some of those milestone dates for like the new schools, and especially with regard to design elements and?
Nice and quick, because it's not on this, it's not for this time.
Yeah, we're on target right now. I feel pretty good about where we're at. We just submitted on target for the PSR, which is preferred schematic, on February 20th. We've received some comments. We're scheduled for a meeting on March 13th at MSBA, and then the board meeting, subsequent to that in April. So next big submission is basically just around the end of the school year, and we're scheduled already onto their August 28th board meeting for final approval, where they'll actually set the effective reimbursement rate as well.
And we're looking for a December town meeting.
December or
Override vote.
November?
November.
November,
November
right.
13th.
November
is the
13th,
tentative date.
yeah.
Thank
Sorry, I
you.
just went,
And you said the end of
Yeah.
August for the FSBA, I thought it was the end of July,
August 28th.
August
We
28th.
submit July 10th. The
Okay.
board
Yeah.
meeting is August 20th.
That's right, July 10th
Yeah.
is the gross number, and August 28th is the net number
Right.
that we have
Yeah.
to know about. Okay. Does that, I didn't want to, sorry to cut it short on that, but we're going to spend all fall talking about that.
Going off on a
Yeah.
tangent.
Yeah,
Hi, thank you, Dr. White.
just Mr., but that's okay. I take any honorary degrees that are given, so, yeah. I've received many in this position, that's okay. Thank you.
I second what everybody said about working in conjunction. I see more integration of the various groups and through leadership team and the putting finance people on the Capitol. Maybe someday there'll be a finance member from each town on the school budget committee. But it's going in the right direction. I think that's possible. One minor thing about your slides, the interest on that bond, 7.5 million that we're going to be borrowing. We're not going to spend it right away. A couple of years, take the.
You're going to spend most of it.
Correct, we'll be using a strategy of short-term borrowing and issuing bands through the first 2 to 3 years as the projects are completed, and then issue the
So
bond.
you're going to draw, because I was wondering, what are you going to do with the money if you're going to borrow the whole 7.5? You're not going to do that. You're going to draw like a line of credit kind of thing and
You can
not-
you can get State House notes to fund the individual projects' cash flow, and then when they're done, then you issue the bonds, retire all the short-term debt, and pay off the bonds.
Okay, because I didn't see the interest from the.
That's a really good point.
It's actually
that
on
not
there.
everybody understands. So over the first 3 years, we'll be borrowing what we need. And the building project will work the same way. So the actual full debt doesn't happen till the projects are done.
Would we be able to lock in?
A bond rate? No.
It'd be nice if we borrowed, but, and then the rates go up, and now we're making more money on what we haven't used them. But we can't lock in until a couple of years from now.
You're not allowed to make money on that anyway, so.
What's that called? Arbitrage?
Right.
Yeah,
And my last comment has to do with key performance indicators. I don't know, boy. And I want to encourage you to keep working on operational results. We talked a couple of years, last year was an investment on, it's not English as a second language, it's a group of people that needed to be accelerated into the mainstream. And we're going to add some more resources and special classes that we're going to accelerate those folks into the program faster. And obviously that is an issue in town because we get more people that aren't at the same level coming into our
Right.
school system as residents that have been here for 5-6 years. So I really would encourage the school that, the number of students in a classroom, the ratio of teachers, the dollars per student, it's great to measure, but what really is important to measure is the success of programs that you test, you try out. And some are going to fail and some are going to be successful, but you don't do KPIs that say, you know what, it used to take us 1.5 years to get these students mainstreamed, and now it's 12 months.
sure.
Yay, we need to invest in this thing. What precipitated my thinking is is the fact that we have stress and mental health problems in our students, is the answer that we bring medical personnel to help them with that problem, or is that the problem of a different disease? And the way in which we do our curriculum is the real critical thing about not bringing them to those levels of stress.
Sure.
And therefore, it's the dependent, independent variable, and how of symptom versus the the disease. And so a KPI would be so helpful if 2 years from now you could say to me, you know what, isn't it a shame? We've got too many nurses. The number of problems that are coming to the nurses is decreasing because we're investing instead in programs that are
Sure.
getting the kids more chilled out and happy and those kinds of things. And 2-3 years from now, you come to us and say, we're going to reduce the number of nurses and mental health people in the program. So I really encourage that whether it's difficult to publish that out externally or not, I don't know, but we should have a lot of KPIs to focus on how well they're doing.
Great, thank you.
Roland?
I'm good.
So Hannah?
Thank you. This was a great presentation, and I'm still digesting all the information from there. The one thing, I echo everyone, and one of the things that Christy also asked, and somebody else did too, the 2016, the list that came out in 2016 by Doreen Whittier, compared to the one in 2019. So that was a significant number, 120 million to 20 million. So I know you did mention that there were wish lists and stuff, but there must have been something that they identified might need a change. Is it going to be coming up in the near future, which has not been accounted for, or is just scraped off? Because you did say about the high school lockers. So why did it come in the wish list to begin with? Was there a problem with it? Changes to that? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So a couple things. Thanks to Hannah. I think it's a good question. So just big macro numbers. Gates and Douglas were almost 40 million of the 120. So they're out of it. Conant was another. Each school was roughly 20 million, to talk in round numbers. So Conant's not addressed yet. So that's our next sort of proposal to MSBA, and we have to be further along, if not done, with the Gates Douglas project before we can go to them for Conant. The admin building's not in there.
Tear it down.
And so those are huge chunks. In terms of things that were there, that why would we have put them there if they were just nice to haves? I mean, it was a detailed look, but over a short period of time, at 8 schools and everything that might need to be done over 10 years. That was their charge. So they threw in a lot of things that we as a community would make different decisions about based on kind of our economic views. So it was intended to be comprehensive and to include anything and everything you might need to do over 10 years. And it was done relatively quickly. So the duplication, I think Peter gave some good examples of why, and that was in there. But yeah, things like lockers, you may or may not decide to replace in the next 10 years at the high school.
Do you have anything else, Hannah?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Christine, then Jeff, then Christy.
So they also had in there, replace the playground mulch, which we already do every year, so it just didn't need to be in there. And then there was a hit list of health and safety items that actually the district has already addressed.
That
they did last year. So that's part of that as well. That was just done through the past
Just curious.
budget.
Jeff?
Since it seems to have come up many times, it would be just so easy, and you might have this as a backslide when you need to. 120 million minus 60 million for these schools that we're handling separately, that's 60 million, minus 10 million for maintenance that we already do, minus, you get down to 20 million. You just have 5 or 6 broad categories, and then...
I swear I didn't put him up to
Yeah.
this.
No, we actually did that with our capital subcommittee, because Skanska prepared that memo.
Because somebody's
Yeah.
going to say, how did you get,
But this came up in just our last meeting.
It's just so simple.
Christie.
So Conant needs work, the admin building, and the maintenance shed. Are those in the numbers you showed us for the long term?
No.
The 20 million? No.
Any expectation, any idea what that'll be, how we'll fund it?
So,
Because those are big numbers, right?
Yes.
And I understand we're going to try the MSBA for
Conant.
Conant.
The
But that's
admin building, we're moving the preschool out,
Mhm.
so that's huge. So then that just leaves central office and extended day, and I'm not sure we're gonna spend a lot of money on that building
Glad to
for
hear.
adults.
yeah.
And the maintenance,
Yeah.
we're gonna find another solution for maintenance of buses, that's gonna be less expensive than.
And I presume for Conant, last I heard, we're not looking at a rebuild. It's not another
TBD, right?
total new
We
school.
don't know. And that's the reason that at some point, we had to move this plan forward, because it's been
It's just hard
5 years in the
to
making,
say,
so.
okay, this is what we're
yeah.
expecting going forward
It
unless
is.
there's probably a
Yep.
tens of millions of dollar project.
Right, there's a liability out there still with some of these buildings, and I absolutely get that. I wish we could have tied everything up at one point. But I think the school committee now actually has to think about, okay, what are we doing with Conant? Are we going to apply to the core building program, which is what we're doing with Douglas Gates, or do we want to focus more on just the renovation of that building? And is that a good candidate for that? So that's something that we're already starting to explore, and Skanska's actually helping us with that process, as is the architect. The good news is, because Conant was under consideration as part of this feasibility study, we have all the information now on Conant as well as the Douglas and Gates schools. So we now have good information where we can make some long-term decisions about it, but it's just not, it can't happen quickly. It'll probably be next year's goal to figure out what do we do.
Okay, so we might have an idea within a 5-year timeframe?
Yeah.
what we're
That's probably a
looking
good
at?
way to look at it. 3 to 5 years, we would have a plan.
But just big picture, long-range planning for us, we need to know there's some big unknown. I mean,
Yep.
apart
Yes.
from
Still out there,
Are they
absolutely.
just, you're never gonna know, is it?
Absolutely.
If you're doing a 10-year plan, it's not there. If you're doing a 20-year plan, it's most certainly there.
Right.
And it probably should be in a 10-year, should be right at the cusp on a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
So, first of all, since you laid out a 13-year plan, you're committed to be here for all 13 years and execute on it. Just want to make sure I'm clear about
That's
it.
my goal, so.
Secondly,
Yes.
Point ahead.
Yeah.
None of
secondly, just driving home, just a couple quick points. Driving home, absolutely, to be clear, this is what I wrote down. To be clear, this does not take care of Conant. That is still part of the liability from the original dorm review report.
That is
Please
correct.
don't.
You wrote
please
while
don't-
you were driving?
I wrote that down.
It's
Yeah.
not safe,
I wrote it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, just another point,
Yeah.
when you are presenting in front of the town, make absolutely sure when you talk about the budget, this being a budget amendment, and how you're going to be coming to the towns for budget amendments in subsequent years, stress the fact that this is not an assessment change. The word assessment is in your description, people's hair are going to go on fire about that. Stress that this is not an assessment change. With regard to policy setting, you're going to go back and speak to the school committee about this. Make sure that if there is a large deviation from what's in the SIP plan, that you absolutely broadcast that early and often. Do not bury the SIP plan. Make sure that the SIP plan is something that is discrete for as many years as you possibly can, preferably forever. Commit to showing the SIP plan every year so that we know, so that this stabilization fund can basically be treated as an independent entity, an independent budget line item for all subsequent years. I can imagine a couple of years from now, you might be tempted to say, well, this is part of our capital plan, and sort of hide that, not be as transparent as you are now. I think you're doing a great job now. I'm just saying, please don't change. As long as there's a member of the finance committee on the SIP plan, we're going to want to see this as an independent.
Jason, we
independent
created
line.
a new separate character code for that reason.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it.
Dave's idea.
Good. I want to reiterate that you're targeting 4 to 4.5% as E&D. Do you have and this is corollary to what I just said about make sure that if there's a large deviation from the SIP plan, that we're informed about it. if we're using the numbers for the stabilization fund as you laid out here, if there is a large, are you going to ask for a policy from the school committee on what level, what percentage of monies you want in the stabilization fund, or a not to exceed percentage, or a variance from what you've just laid out, percentage? I know you don't have to have an answer on that policy now, but that is something that I will ask at next year's school budget Saturday, is what's your policy on what the levels that go there are. And then, so you heard from multiple people, and this did come up at our last capital improvement plan subcommittee meeting. So I'm not hallucinating on this. Having a delta sheet of what was in the Dorn-Whittier plan. The comment was made, well, this is the new plan, it doesn't matter what the Dorn-Whittier plan was. I'm sorry, I reject that, and I want to be very public about it. When you go and get the next plane, you can throw out the Dorn-Whittier plan. It's great that you have your own, but in the meantime, there are going to be plenty of people who remember the 120 number. You remember it as well. If you've got something, to what Jeff pointed out, I'd like a little more meat on the bones than what Jeff was willing to let you off the hook on. I would love to see that, and if you can, we've discussed in the past, about having some kind of dashboard where what percentage of your debt are you retiring. I would still love to see it. School committee member backed me up in the SIP plan in your office. Please don't forget about it. It's gonna start to irk me eventually. So do we have a workup of the old Dorn-Whittier report? That covers that.
This is Jason doing cartwheels, right?
Yeah.
No, this is not me on the happy side. I was definitely happy with the 209. Don't get me wrong there. Okay, that actually is everything that I wanted to say on this topic. Christy?
I'm sorry, the typing and thinking, I can't keep up with everything. Do you have an idea of when the school committee will have come up with policies on the use for the stabilization fund?
Our hope is by the end of this current fiscal year.
It would make it so much easier to stand up at town meeting and say, this is a great idea. That's some idea.
And it's more than a hope. Like, hope is not a strategy. I get that, but our goal is by the end of this fiscal year.
But it's not going to be by April 1st.
No, but we need to just stand up there and give an opinion without really knowing.
Yep.
But the intent is not millions and millions of dollars. I know that you want to see that. I know.
Part of the problem is that it could be. And everyone's working with the best of intentions on this, but the people who are backstop with it, like we did townspeople, is the school committee, and if we don't know what their stance is on this, it's hard for us to.
I believe the Reagan quote was trust but verify.
Is a self-imposed cap a realistic?
I'm not necessarily asking for a self-imposed cap. I just want to know what their policy is, and so that we know what they're measuring themselves against. Because if there is suddenly a $2 million deviation from what they've got in there, we're going to want to know why the hell that happened.
Right. Yeah, and it needs some longer-term discussion about what a cap might look like. I think some type of a cap, but if it's a hard number, I would probably say that may not be the most prudent, because we do want to have the flexibility to save for long-term projects. So I think what it might be is you might have maybe some line items within your stabilization where you have an emergency fund that has a cap on what you might reasonably need in an emergency fund, but then you also have to be transparent if you have long-term projects you're saving for.
Yep.
Like, we know 3 years, okay, we want to replace field lights. I'm not saying that's the plan, but if we do, be transparent about how you're saving within that, and then put your cap on the emergency piece of it. I think that, to me, feels realistic and executable.
Are there any other questions on any of the three articles with regard to the ABRSD?
I move that we recommend the Acton Boxborough Regional School District assessment.
Second.
Anyone want to discuss it?
We are out of order. Point of order. We are out of order on the warrant article discussion agenda. We've not reached that point.
Fair enough.
I withdraw my motion.
I withdraw my second.
I promise to make it again.
Yeah, that's true. That was because it's just input. You're absolutely right. I didn't put vote on that line. Well done. Okay, we will hold off. Thank you very much for saving us from another conversation at a later time. Okay. You guys are welcome to hang out for the next half an hour if you want to hear how we vote. If not, I'll let you know this. Let you know the results in the end.
All right, sounds
Chairman,
good.
would you take a motion to change the order of the agenda?
Sure.
Second?
I move that we postpone the
No, wait.
second quarter financial update.
Until when? Be very
After
careful
the-
how you answer this. Until when?
After we vote on the warrant articles,
All of them?
all of them.
No,
I don't second.
no, because there's 30 warrant articles.
We may not vote on all of them, but
Yeah, no, I don't like that.
Stay the way we are.
Someone gets a second if they want, right?
Do I hear a second?
You want to be
Leslie,
specific about these 3 articles?
sure. I move that
7, 8,
we
and 9.
postpone the second quarter
do it by name.
until after we have voted on
Give me the list. You've got it.
That may have changed.
Article 7, Article 8, and Article 9.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of making a slight change to the agenda to discuss these 3 ABRSD articles before taking up second quarter financial update, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Brian's here all night.
Sorry. It's hard to think and vote and write all at once.
Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, I'm good.
No abstentions.
Are there any abstentions?
I say aye.
Very well.
That was
I
unanimous, right?
move to recommend the Acton Boxborough Regional School District Assessment.
Hold on. Wait. She's
You
not
probably-
done.
you
She's not
should-
done talking yet.
Oh, you want me to say more?
The amount.
For the amount of?
The amount. Thank you.
For the amount of $61,235,254, consisting of a capital assessment of $2,726,396 and an operating assessment of $58,508,858.
Second.
Anyone want to discuss this? Are we ready to vote?
Do you have a presentation?
No, but I've got sarcasm on my right-hand side.
It's all around you, buddy.
I was going to say, I think it's your left.
All those in favor of the motion as read, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? You don't vote, so it doesn't matter. Very good.
I don't vote too.
I know, but
Sorry.
it's all good.
Ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
You doing this one?
No, you can do it. I'm
All
fine with
right.
that.
I move that we recommend the Acton Boxborough Regional School District Capital Improvement Plan to see if the town will vote to approve of authorizing the treasurer of the regional school district to borrow the sum of $7,500,000 for the purpose of paying construction, installation, and all other associated costs of providing capital improvements identified hereof in the regional school district's capital improvement plan or take any other action relative thereto.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We're gonna get that one rolling.
Steve can have it.
Anyone want to discuss it, or Dave, would you like to make a presentation?
I would, but is there one?
Okay, very good. Any other conversation? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Ms. Anderson? Ms. Yes?
I would like to discuss this. I would like to hear other committee members' opinions. Okay. Well, we're up to the next.
I move that we recommend the Acton Boxborough Regional School District authorize regional stabilization fund. Need me to read the rest?
No, I trust you.
We need a motion before we can discuss it?
Yes.
I'll
Do I hear a
second
second?
that.
Roland seconds it. Okay, we have conversation. Ms. Anderson?
I would like to hear other people's opinions. as
I'll
I-
give mine.
Thank you.
I think for the long term, what the fund is intended to do will be a benefit to the town, to the schools. Anything that improves your bond rating, lower your cost of borrowing, being in the financial world myself. So put it this way, you're buying a house. If you can get a 0.25% lower on your mortgage over 30 years, that's a lot of money.
I don't disagree with any of that. It's
So
tempting to-
that's where I feel that the stabilization fund is a good thing. Yeah, it does leave it in the hands of the school committee to make that decision, but that's why we're elected. We elect them to represent us. And I think if the school committee should, not gonna say they will, when they want to take out of the stabilization, when they should note that and have a special, maybe have a special meeting or have part of their meeting that people can voice their concern over what the money's coming out to be used for. And it's only going to be used for capital improvements, not going to be used for paying the light bill, you know? So we know our schools are aging, our buildings are aging, they got to be maintained. I feel this is just another tool in the tool basket to help the town and help the school district to manage future needs and future costs.
I would love to hear a policy.
Jeff?
Those of you, many of you are probably not old enough to remember when people got paid in cash. And I remember my wife, my mother having envelopes, and she put a certain amount of money in each envelope for this project or that project, and eventually she'd have enough money for summer camp or whatever it was. I think, yes, the school committee should have a program, but I believe they could have sub-accounts in the account for that capital fund, and as they identify this school's going to need this for this amount of money 4 years from now, they can then start putting that money in that sub-account so that 4 years from now that money will be there for that specific sub-account. And that kind of addresses your concept of you have a little pool for emergencies, but you know you're going to need money for different capital programs. And I think it would make it more difficult for a future school committee to just arbitrarily take money out of sub-accounts that were meant for a certain building's roof and spend it on frivolously on something else. So I do want to have the policy, but I think this is a good first start, and I think by having those sub-accounts, it can give them a methodology and an understanding of how much to put away and where to put it so that it's there.
I would agree with Jeff in terms of it's a good first step. It'd be nice to have a policy, but in effect, the state DOR regulations and what you can bond, it's going to specify what you can use it on. What I'd like to know is how far in advance the savings going to start and how big the balance will eventually be. I mean, we have limitations on most spending. A warrant article that hasn't been spent in 3 years is dead, basically. So we need some sort of time frame and amounts that say, well, if we're going to save for the roof in the Parker Damon building, we're going to save so much a year for so many years. And if it doesn't happen, then that money has to either flow back out of the stabilization fund or be repurposed for some other reason. But it needs a policy, for sure. Whether it needs it between now and April 1st, it's not important to me.
So that's why, when I had my opportunity to speak to this, that's why I did point out that I wanted to know what if you're going to deviate from the SIP plan, why. And I think that while that's not a hard and fast policy, I did ask for what's the policy going to be from the school committee on limit, what's your upper limit going to be, or what's your purpose going to be. So I am sympathetic to Christie's comment about, in year 13, you're going to be able to do what traditionally had been a townwide vote. This does change that. I think as long as the transparency that I asked for is kept, and as long as when you're on the subcommittee, that you keep in mind that we are trying to hew to a known set of risks, then I believe this is an effective means of getting there. One of the questions I didn't ask, but what weighs bearing on this is corollary to when I asked for a dashboard of what's being retired when. Part of the reason I asked for that is because I do look at the Dorn Review report as a full listing of liabilities, and so by knowing how much of the risk is being taken off, you're actually addressing the concerns of the longer-term plans for what the capital needs are. Sorry, got distracted. That was the bell. Would anybody else have a comment? Mr. Wellington?
Yeah, I would third or fourth Christie's points, and I think just that accountability part of it is what I understand what as you explained it, the state legislation is, and keeping in the bounds of capital and so on and so forth. at the town level, it's gotten to be just a squishy extra fund that's out there that can support a lot of different interests. And admittedly, these in the school sense may be all limited to capital, but they could get also squishy, and these funds can tend to break down the discipline of how we're focused on allocating this money, because there's excess money in the system and it's been built up and it's been worked down, it's been built up in bigger and bigger numbers. So I mean, I think you just want to stay really cognizant of her point that this doesn't have the normal, we're going in front of the town and that group of people are deciding these things. But I also, kind of poo-poo the rating agency side of it. And the agencies always want more money in funds. They always want extra stuff set aside, and that always makes them happy. But there's a cost associated with doing all of that. And the question of whether it's 15 basis points or 25 is obviously very important. It's a material amount of money to the town, but the cost of getting there is the establishment of the stabilization fund, which does take money out of the control of the town, puts it directly in the school committee's hands, which is something we all think, as you pointed out, is a good thing. But at the time being, there's just a cost associated with creating these funds, and they get a life of their own. And wow, we have these capital projects, and this was kind of a nice to have. And I'm not saying you're suggesting this at all, but there's something here that, let's get a Cuspy project that was $1.5 million. Well, the stabilization fund has $4 million in it, and we're not really sure we need a new roof or whatever. It's just like, I think we all have, certainly the most respect in the world that you guys make the right decisions, and you historically certainly have. But it's just a caution that I personally have learned on the town side, is that it can get a little blurry, and I think we're all just echoing those critical points.
One of the questions that Steve asked during school budget Saturday is what entities in this SIP plan were not in Dorwood, and I think we're all very concerned about making sure that the stabilization fund doesn't get rated for new projects that were not already identified as something we were trying to retire.
Yeah, more importantly, there's just not a check and balance as much as there is.
Yes.
That.
Well, and part of my concern here is that we're not talking to the school committee members.
Got it.
And they're the ones who set the policy, who really in the end decide up or down.
Okay.
And they haven't, it sounds like, discussed their policy on this thing that we need to give an opinion on.
Does Ms. Russell need to present in front of the next school committee meeting?
I think it would be, yes.
Okay, you got
I'll
homework.
send Christy, they won't know.
You got homework.
That's right.
We'll know her name, though.
Okay, is there any other conversation on this article that people would like to register at this time? Okay, we have a motion and it has been seconded. All those in favor of recommending this article, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions? You're good? Very good. You guys are welcome to stay and listen to the town side and all the rest of the articles, or if you need to get going, we understand that too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your time, and your feedback was really helpful.
Thank you all.
All of you.
Thank you.
This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay,
I will hand this back to you.
and I'll take the microphone too.
Got it.
Brian, you're up.
I have to apologize to Dave.
Oh, thank you.
Probably should have teased him there at the end. So Christy could present.
He's got good thick skin.
Oh, good, good.
And he gives as good as he takes.
Oh,
I
good.
don't have overhead, and I didn't bring a laptop.
How fast can you talk?
Do we care about this? Is this
Nothing
important?
here, there's nothing here.
There's nothing.
Spoiler alert, it's all
Right?
good.
It's on the agenda.
I know.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was a time frame.
I'm sorry, I didn't expect it would take an hour and a half to do the school thing. I told him I needed 15 minutes.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Brian, to your presentation.
Thank you very much.
So, this is Q2 of FY19, so as you know, our target is about 50% on the expenditures and 50% on the revenue side. So, as always, this data you can find on the town website. your financial documentation or budget heading on the top of the page. Always has been in the same old place. We know the details there. This is just kind of a summary of that data. So getting into the general fund revenues. So the one thing about Q2 is we're halfway through the year, the tax rate's been set, and a lot of that data now has been submitted to State Department of Revenue. As you know, in Q1, everything's kind of estimated based on ALG numbers. Q2 kind of summarizes and pulls up all the town spending and revenues together, and summary form gets submitted to the State Department of Revenue with set up tax rate. So total revenue that we anticipated for the year was 94 million. Our target is 50%. Well, we missed it by 1%. We're at 45.8%. Compared to last year's at 56%. Well, if you recall, with President Trump's tax change, we had a lot of prepays last year, about 7.5 million at the end of December of 31. So a significant amount of prepays. So you see that difference there, that 7% would represent that $7.5 million. So the property tax, the target again was 49%. We put bills out in the street of 86.2. Year to date, we've collected 42.2%. Again, compared to last year, that same scenario, all that money that came in was primarily the prepays and tax because of the Trump change.
I thought you said the FY19 actual is 49%, not 42.2.
Yes,
49%,
first column,
42.2
millions. Okay, yeah, he said percentage. Though.
Yeah, I know.
Never mind.
Did I get that?
Yes,
Sorry.
first one too.
But the interesting matter too is we just kind of did a year to date now on the real estate side just to see where our target is or where we're lining up. And right now we're about 74.9%. So we're lining up as far as year to date. As you all know, you pay your bills on time, and we appreciate that. We have a very good collection rate here. It's very high, and you know that actually helps tremendously on our side of the house. It makes things a lot easier for us. State aid, $1.3 million year to date, so we got $837K or 62% compared to last year's at 73. No concerns there, we're trending right where we want to be. SBAB, as you know, that comes in one lump sum, that reduces the twin schools debt to the town. That's the reimbursement rate there, $923,000. That's all in-house.
To be clear, that's the old twin school. That's Parker Damon. That's not the new one. Just want to be blunt about that.
Twin 2, Twin 1.
So local receipts, if you notice the asterisks there, as most of you are aware and know that we've just recently sent out those motor vehicle excise tax bills, which aren't due until March 25th. So hence, we're a little behind as far as the revenues as local receipts because the bulk of that $5.5 million, which is about 3.2 in motor vehicle excise, is just coming in now. So you'll see that in Q3. And just to make a note here that our free cash certification as of 6/30/2018 was 2.6 compared to the prior fiscal year, which was at 3.9. So it is done. So on the expense side of the house, so just looking at the town operation, the town operating budget of $33,837,365. Year to date, we've expended $17,385,310, or 51%. We're trending right where we want to be. I mean, a lot of that is going to be encumbrances. We can use that PO system. So for instance, if we have known cost and we have a contract and we know we're going to expend that whole contract for the whole year, we PO that right on day one because we know we're going to spend it. So that's some of the nuances.
Do you really pay Steve Barrett's salary on day one, the full year?
What's that?
Make sure we don't pay him anything until the last day of the year to make sure he stays.
The more interesting side of things, which would be the enterprise funds, and we all know that we get 5 or 6 of them. They all come with their many nuances, so we'll go through those briefly. The first one is septic enterprise fund. So unlike sewer, septic is going to handle inspections, Title 5, replacements, and so on and so forth. And there's fees associated with that. That goes into the septic fund. Also, the haulers that pump the septic systems also have revenues that go into this fund as well. The projected revenues for fiscal 19 were $187,000, of which $70,000 was going to be coming from retained earnings. So we pledged that right up front. So what happens when the vote's taken at town meeting, we pull that right out of the available fund balance to make sure we pull it out of their free cash calculation, so to speak. And the year-to-date revenue, excluding the 70,000 of retained earnings, is 89,370, so we're at about 48%. We only use retained earnings at the end of the fiscal year if we need the retained earnings, so it's kind of held off to the side. And then at year end, to make sure that our revenues meet our expenses, we only dip into the retained earnings, so it's kind of a not to exceed amount. So if we need.
So that's a lot of big turn back. If you take 70 out of 187, out of 117 budget excluding, you've already got 90 of it. And you're only halfway through the year.
That's correct, Jeff. Yeah.
So
we're trending very well. We did it as a kind of a safety net, as a safety precaution. So in the expense side of the house, again, 79,441 of 187, so we're at 42%, so we're beating it on that end. No concerns with septage. Cheryl Ball, who handles this, and Board of Health does a nice job in monitoring this. So moving on to transfer station and recycling, as you know, there's been a lot of changes through the last few years with this, with pay-as-you-throw. There's a lot of concerns that it may not be as successful, and I probably say this every time, that they had originally anticipated, but it's done extremely well. We hit our targeted numbers, and so people are conserving. They're recycling more and using less trash. When people are using less trash, it means that we don't need to have our contract haulers haul that trash away. So the savings there. So if you look at the enterprise budget over the last few years, that cost has come down because we don't have that contractual service for the haulers to haul that trash. We're doing it through recycling, which is really good. So the year-to-date revenues were $619,387. Again, asterisk, we had reserved $100,000 of retained earnings, kind of a precautionary thing. Year-to-date, we've collected $412,185, or about 67%. You're gonna go, well, that number looks really good, Brian. Well, it is a good number, but however, this is not linear. This number is, we get, as you probably most of you know, we get most of that revenue in the first half of the year through sticker sales in October. So, and then the rest of it will be linear based on bag sales and so on and so forth, which are linear, but the bulk of this money does come in at the beginning of the year through those sticker sales.
So is that 412 doesn't include the 100,000?
That does not include the 100,000.
So that's the bulk of the revenue we're going to get.
It is.
And the expenses, though, is more linear.
The expenses are more linear.
So we already lost 60,000, and if we spend it, are you concerned that we've spent, 2/3 of the money in half the year of expenses? Are we going to be on the $850,000 or $900,000 run rate for the year expenses?
No, and what happens, the only thing in the expense line, Jeff, everything is pretty much linear except for those encumbrances.
So you think there's a whole bunch of POs that were in that
And I think what happens is the Karen Swinson-Neff, who's Corey York's assistant, she's the administrative assistant, because the haulers are pretty much, we have a budget for those haulers, so I think she encumbers a lot of that money up front. We don't anticipate any problems here at all. I mean, it's a very well-run program.
So just so that, the reason we ask you to come every quarter is so we get an update and easily can kind of look at something and say, oh, piece of cake. But if things are embedded or not embedded, then it's not easy for a person that's not totally involved to know that a 60,000 loss halfway through the year is we're right on track, because especially since I know that the revenue doesn't include the transfer. And so is there a way that you can communicate this to us? It's a little bit more, simple, that we can come to a conclusion without your expertise to embellish what is and isn't in it. You might just want to think about that for the next one, and I'm happy to help offline to come up with some way to do that, because I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I can't look at this and say, oh, we're okay.
So moving on to the sewer enterprise fund, this fund had some changes to the years. The two major components of revenue here, which represents the $2.2 million, would be the O&M charges. So users presently using the system, that's about $850,000 I think for the year. On the other side would be the sewer betterments themselves, which are quarterly installments. And so that's the two major components that make up that 2.2 million. And if you look again with the asterisks, we've got about $437,000 we're plunging from retained earnings. That's because we've got some studies and some projects we want to do there. And so that's going to be funding those as well. The year-to-date revenue of $838,000 gives us no concern at this point in time. Again, the bulk of that is which is linear, the O&M charges, the quarterly betterments, which come in obviously every quarter with tax bills, but also there's a capital assessment from the schools that also is not in here, and that's about $184,000. That usually gets billed in Q3. So that's going to go right to that year-to-date revenue. Again, there's no concerns here. If you look at the difference between last year-to-date revenues at 55% versus at 38%, well, last year's budget was also around $2 million. This year we're asking for a couple $100,000 more. Again, for continuation of sewers into West Acton, and also looking at the possibility of expanding our leaching fields down at Adams Street, down at the sewage treatment plant itself. The free cash certification as of 6/30 was 902. Right now, we're not seeing any problem here with the sewer enterprise fund. The ambulance enterprise fund, which seems to be one that gets a lot of interest in. Year-to-date, look at the budget here. The budget's $1,220,000, includes $125,000 in retained earnings, so that's its fund balance or it's its free cash number. And this does get a general fund support, so we do have taxation going in to help offset some of those costs. It was never from the beginning, never self-funding. It always had a general fund subsidy of some sort. Originally, it was all in the general fund. When we created the enterprise fund, we knew there was anticipated revenues that would be coming in to help offset some of those costs, and it went directly in there to reduce or help reduce some of the cost of the general fund is paying for. The 808, 495 is the receipts here to date, which are the fees, those are the ambulance fees. As you know, those ambulance fees come in from various sorts, and also private insurance companies, and they come in at different levels. Again, their year-to-date revenues is 66%. This year, fiscal 19, is going to be the first full year of ALS. Last year was a partial year. It was 10 months out of 12 months. So it's going to take probably a couple of years of full ALS activity to kind of get a true handle on where these revenues are going. Again, we don't anticipate any problems. We have that retained earnings we can default to if we have a problem. We don't think we're going to. It's kind of a safety net, if you would. So right now, I think we're in good shape. It does show a small profit, $22,000. And then where we see any issues here.
Is the, we know the 125 is not in the year-to-date, but is the 243,000 in the year-to-date?
That gets moved in on day one.
So that is.
So the 243 is in the 808. That gets moved in on there on day one. Again, retained earnings only get moved in there at the end of the fiscal year if obviously your expenses outpace your revenues.
So would it be fair to say then that instead of 22,000, we're really minus 200,000 year-to-date from pay-as-you-go? In other words, we gave these services, this is how much they paid us, so we're really in the hole 200,000, which would be potentially a $400,000 shortfall for the year, minus the 370,000 that we've added. So it kind of says that we might come out.
Yeah, I mean, you can skin this cat many ways. I know Bob Emmons, when he was in the FinCom, he wanted us to display what's coming from fees, what's coming from your retained earnings, what's coming from your general fund subsidy. We've done this many different ways, and there's pros and cons, I guess, of doing it multiple ways. I'll be happy to address any concerns or any way you guys want this displayed in other formats. I'd be happy to work with you to make it easier to understand. But it is complex, and they all have their different nuances in each and every one of these funds. And there's timing issues with revenues and expenses.
Right, just a question on the town warrant. Because I'm looking at the ambulance enterprise budget, Article 22, and it has fund balance as of 6/30 of $533,125 versus your handout here, which shows the free cash at 408, depletion from retained earnings of 125, which when you combine it, would get you to the 533. So I guess the question is, does this get updated to show the use of that 125? This is inconsistent with this.
It doesn't, Tom, because as you know, the certification's a snapshot as of 6:30, so we would have to predict what we believe our free cash use is. So even though we may have pledged $125,000 from retained earnings, we may or may not need any of that.
So the fund balance that you're showing here is 125 higher than the retained earnings.
Yeah,
And then you said
then they're
on
assuming
date-
they're not gonna use it, though.
Okay.
I guess that's what they're doing. I haven't looked at it yet, but
Still available.
it was a change in State Department of Revenue a number of years
They
ago.
might not
When you
use it.
pledged fund balance at an annual town meeting, they never had you take it out of your certification at year end. But if you've already pledged it for the following fiscal year, you need to put that aside and pull it out of your
Well, it's in a
certification.
fund.
So
It's free
it's
cash.
relatively new change.
Yes.
So that's the unclear part.
Yeah.
That's those two.
It does flood. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brian. Well, we got one more, right? One last transportation, forgot the last slide.
So we had an annual budget of $587,000. Year-to-date revenues of $419,918, or 72%. However, if you look at again, the footnote, this includes $235,000 from general fund subsidy. $119,000 was transferred from the commuter lot, and then also pledged about $22,000 from retained earnings. So the commuter lot money and the general fund subsidy get moved in there on day one. The retained earnings will only be used at year end if it's needed. Again, we don't anticipate a problem. Doug does a pretty good job. Doug Howley, the transportation director, if anybody knows Doug, at really kind of making sure that he brings this in budget. Right now, it shows a profit of $1,150. Not a lot of retained earnings or free cash. If you look, he's got a balance of $8,371 at the close of June 30, 2018. So we really got to keep an eye on this one and monitor it very closely at 6:30, just to make sure we bring it in. But again, we're confident we'll get it done.
Thank you. Sorry, I cut you short a minute ago. Any conversation on this topic, or are we good to go?
Keep rolling.
Ask some questions along the way, did we? Good. At this point in the agenda, we are moving on to warrant articles discussion. It has been brought to my attention that the member of the public who was unable to attend our last meeting would like to address us with regard to amending general bylaws plastic bag reduction, which is currently article number 32 in the most recent draft as of 5 o'clock this afternoon. To that end, Carolyn Platt.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Carolyn Platt, and I've been to this town for 48 years. And I just want to say thank you to all your good work. First time I've ever attended one of these meetings. I'm glad to see there's a little view work. It takes you a lot. Yes, I'm sorry I was out of the country last week, and sorry not to be here to have a flowing conversation. And I hear I have 2 minutes, so if I start talking fast, there is a handout that I sent around earlier, and it's 2 pages, resources on the back. So I will start with paper versus plastic as the environmental impact. And I think the most important thing I'll say tonight is that plastic bags do not go away. There is no clear-cut comparison to make between the two, because there's no way to measure the ecological impact of a persistent material like plastic. So the goal of our bylaw is not to replace plastic with paper. The more you use a reusable bag, the more ecologically sound it is. And paper bags in our bylaw are required to be made at 40% post-consumer waste and are to be 100% recyclable. Amazingly, only 7% of the plastic bags across the nation are recycled. And the destination of those that are recycled is, I'm still trying to figure out. where they go. But mainly they are shipped over to Asia. China now has what they call a green belt. So they're going to Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, and come down to the rivers and end up in the ocean. Another important factor is the health impact of the plastics. Since they don't decompose, they do break up into what are called little microplastic pieces. And these pieces attract toxins. They are ingested by fish and they enter into the food chain. Now, paper bags do not go into the food chain. What does Acton have to do with all this? Well, amazingly, going into the supermarkets, I have found snapper and tuna from Indonesia, tilapia from Thailand. I haven't checked lately, that was about a month ago, but that makes the world a small place. So the economic impact of a ban, the Board of Health has agreed to be the enforcement agent at no additional cost to the town. And once things get rolling, businesses, they are selling now reusable bags for profit. And as we transition, the expectation is, as has happened in other towns, going to fewer paper bags. Consumers would transition to reusable bags, and we at Ban the Bag Acton, we're very committed to providing bags to people who might not be able to afford them. And we have gotten a grant for $1,000 to pay for a lot of these bags. So let's see. Question: would bag fees help reduce single-use plastic checkout bags? Well, we certainly agree with what you learned last week. Yes, they would. Our problem in Acton and other towns is we're not allowed to levy fees. For some reason, cities and the state are. So the proposed state bag ban has included a 10-cent fee for paper bags. And so far, there are 93 towns and cities in Massachusetts that have passed bag bans, and this is our way of sending a message to the state to pass this state bill. And we're very supportive of that. We have 10 more towns this spring. We're going for a town meeting to pass bag bans. Jamie would like us to be town 100. So, in the meantime, a lot of we've been visiting the businesses, the retailers, and restaurants. A lot of them have chosen to go plastic-free. And none of them, they've actually been rather proud, not complaining about that. Okay. And finally, I'll just say that is the bag ban a solution to the problem of plastic? Unfortunately, no. But it is a step in the right direction to raise the consciousness of the effects of the consumption of plastic and to create leverage for a statewide bag with a bag fee. So we are asking that you would, since we weren't able to talk about this thing with both sides, that you would be willing at least to be open to reconsidering your vote.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions for the petitioner? Do we have significant new information? Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes.
The town of Stockbridge, Mass. has a bag ban. Mm-hmm. When you go to the stores, if you want to use a paper bag, they charge you for that. Is that something that stores could choose to do specifically? Because they are a town, not a city.
Yeah. A store can choose.
So there is an option that the stores have themselves, but it's not, we couldn't as a town institute it.
But our supermarkets, actually they all have other stores in towns that already have bans, and I don't think they've opted to do that.
Okay, because the presentation we had last week showed that it was much more effective to have people charge for bags actually got them to
we agree
change.
With that, and that's why we're working for this ban, joining the other communities, the 93 others that already have their bans, to influence the state.
Thank you.
Sahana?
Just a quick question. I know you say that many Acton retailers are in sync with this plan of banning plastic bags in their retail stores. So do you have a number of how many retailers want this and how many are not in favor of it?
Okay. We've been going around and we visited, I'd say, either visited or talked on the phone with about 50 stores and restaurants. And of those, we've identified 20 who are already not using plastic. And obviously, we got a whole range. For the most part, they're resigned. They say, we know this is happening, we've been planning for it, it's happening in other stores. And obviously, I think some of the very small stores are disappointed. You know,
Okay, and just a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
So how much would it impact on their, the profit margin and stuff if they're forced to go plastic-free? I mean, would they have to, what would be the impact on their businesses?
well, again,
I answered that.
Yeah.
Oh, but she doesn't. You could go. Or you want me
Go
to?
Take your
go ahead and
presentation.
answer first, and then
Sure, our
Christine.
hope is reusable bags, and that's a big thing if this does pass, that we are going to be working on very hard to promote them, give them out, so that people will be using those. So I do not have numbers.
Sahana?
Okay, so in the Republic of Ireland, they passed a bag ban, and paper bag usage went up 400%. And then they instilled a fee, and then bag use in general went down. So without a fee, we can expect paper bag usage to go up. A paper bag is 8 to 10 cents each, and a plastic bag is a fraction of 1 cent. And I spoke to several of our large retail establishments, and while they do have other locations where there is a bag ban in place, they are not looking forward to absorbing those costs. And that just answers that question.
Okay, thank you.
This is a very socially conscious town, so I assume most people who see the benefit of using a reusable bag are already doing it. Maybe check with a big retailer like Stop and Shop or Roche Brothers to get a sense of, are they using paper, plastic, or reusable?
Actually, we had some high school students who stood outside on a Saturday for all the stores, the big ones, for an hour and tallied. And plastic bags, I don't have those numbers with me, one by far, followed by paper, and then reusable.
So doesn't that tell you that most people would rather use plastic or paper?
Well, at this point, again, if the plastic is banned, they don't have, then their choice is paper or reusable. And again, I'm hoping that within 2 years, the state bill will be passed where it's going to be required to pay 10-cent fee.
So it's imposing this on the majority of the population who may not want it.
Just
Right, but at least
like
then
the
it's even,
smoking ban.
right, but at least then it's even-handed. At least then it's not actually causing, if you ban the plastic bag but you allow the paper bag, then you are actually, and Christine's numbers show that, you're going to encourage people to go with paper bag, which does have a cost. Whereas I'm much more sympathetic to a socially imposed, as long as it's even-handed statewide, that any bag has a fee to try and encourage people to use the canvas, cloth, whatever, many-use recycled bag, many-use bags. So if we're only 2 years out from there being potentially a statewide fee to it, then I definitely don't want to be one of the towns that imposes that cost early, the cost of the paper bags early. Sahana?
I just want, go ahead.
The only thing on that is we want to be part of the movement.
But in the meantime, the environmental downside is a massive increase in the use of paper bags. And the paper bags have a larger environmental impact despite the fact that plastic bags stay in the environment forever. if you look at the whole stream from the production of the paper bag all the way through the recycling end, and the whole stream of the production of the plastic bag all the way through the recycling end, there's all of the data says, and I understand that you're going to focus on the particles in the end, but the environmental cost of the paper bag process, it means you have to use that paper bag 3 times to offset the cost of that one-time plastic bag. And paper bags rip, and they get wet, and they are not reused 3 times. If they are put in a landfill, they both don't break down. They both stay there and forever. And I already forgot what my third point was. So, and reusable bags are 100% not recyclable. So, I'm not convinced that the environmental upside is proven to offset the cost that we know it's going to. I mean, prices are going to go up if the cost to the retailer goes up, and that means that Acton businesses and taxpayers will both be impacted.
Consumers in particular.
So we're going to work as hard as we can to get people using reusable bags.
That's fantastic. I'm all for that. And I'd love to see more recycling options, maybe even at the transfer station for those plastic bags with handles, until we get this changed.
Well, those plastic bags, if they go into the recycling machinery,
if they go into recycling, right, which is why there are separate recycling places in Donnellan's and Roach Brothers that will take those bags, and they ship them, tons of them, every week. And I would love to see that also captured at our recycling center. Even if they're incinerated, you're solving your waterway issue and flyaway issue and litter issue with plastic bags.
But most of them are shipped to Asia, and then that brings in the whole food cycle, food chain.
Okay. So this.
I just want to make a comment. I understand this entire thing, but just looking at the last comment that you made, I know this has been an issue, and this is a small step towards making something better for the cost of 1 cent versus 7 cents. That might cost us extra.
Plus the environmental impact of the paper bag.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but my point is, like she said, it's been shipped out, and I have seen those gross pictures, and it's just not China and Thailand. It is, the coast of southern India too, and it is a whole lot of pollution. And countries, third world countries, have already banned plastic bags. And I know I cannot get a plastic bag in Bangalore when I go. It's people take their reusable bags. Okay. So just from a social conscience,
Okay, we did vote this at the last meeting. We'll take a preponderance of a groundswell of desire to change our not recommended vote from last time. Am I hearing a groundswell to change the votes, or are we going to let our current not recommended stand? Anybody actively looking to have changed their mind since the last vote? I am not seeing a groundswell. So we are not going to revote this article, but I do thank you for your time, and I appreciate you coming in. Okay. With that, we will move on to the other warrant articles that we passed over last meeting. I believe we are going to start with sidewalks and traffic calming. And this was
That's me.
number 6. We're going by titles and then cross-referencing with numbers because we've got the latest thing. So page 26, Article 6, sidewalks and traffic calming for areas other than the Kelly's Corner.
Yes.
Ms. Russell, to you.
So this now has numbers, has dollar amounts. This is a new fund. They have commissioned a sidewalk group to discuss where to improve sidewalks and where to add sidewalks in town. And it's a new initiative, which is why this is much higher than previous budgeted year. I do have a list of the sidewalk improvement sites. If anybody is interested in them, I will happily share them with you. They're, Great Road, Davis to Maine, High Street 77 to Parker. There's a nice list of them. But basically, they commissioned a new sidewalk study. They're creating a sidewalk toolkit to look at the entire town, and this is their first stab at improving the sidewalks throughout town. Yes.
So this is not just putting in a sidewalk where one does not exist.
It may
means-
be.
Huh?
It may be.
Yeah.
Or it may.
But it also
Sorry.
includes existing sidewalks that would be improved.
Yes, and signage and crosswalks and anything to do with the safe walking.
Okay.
Relate to those issues.
Could you clarify, you said something about a plan. Is there, like the capital plan for buildings, do we have like, we have X number of feet of sidewalk today, we want to get to this, how we get there?
It is still under development. It is called the Calming Toolkit, and they are still developing what it's going to look like in the end. But they knew that these things were going to be at the highest priority, and so how far it goes in the end is not yet determined.
And is it my understanding that we already have a program and policies about new construction has to have sidewalks, so it's not,
right.
So we're talking about
Fixing existing, yeah.
There was, for many years, a very active sidewalk committee that prioritized where they needed to go. On new construction, they pretty much tagged the developer, builder, with the cost of the sidewalk. But, there are existing sidewalks that need to be updated and yeah, maybe some new ones. So it's not a lot of money as things go in the budget.
It's 12 listed sites that they're planning to add or improve. And again, I'll read them off if anybody.
No.
Okay, good. So I guess I move to recommend the town capital sidewalks and traffic calming article.
Good.
Second.
Any further conversation on this article?
Just a quick question, do you have any sense of what the normal traffic and highway safety, what the engineering department's budget is for just sidewalk maintenance in general?
I do not, I'm sorry.
There's a number somewhere in the budget book, Dave.
It's a great question, though.
But it's in there. I know that.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of recommending town capital sidewalks and traffic calming, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Very well. I believe the next one to discuss is CPC, direct appropriations from fund balances. I believe it is Article 11. We will find out in a second. Still 11?
Yep, still 11.
Excellent. Can be found on page 29. And Roland, this is yours.
This is mine. I didn't attend last meeting.
That's why you're talking tonight.
That's why I'm talking tonight. As far as I know, because I kind of wanted to have them come in tonight, but I didn't get that coordinated early enough, so I do apologize to everybody for that. I'm making it went over their budget. It is laid out in the warrant article of what they want to do. I still, at this point, do not know, by looking at the list of projects that they have, what their final numbers are yet.
Yeah, these can't be final numbers, right? Because don't they have to have a certain amount from each of the main buckets to qualify?
Yeah, so of your pillars, you have to have 10% to open space, historical preservation, affordable housing, and I'm missing one of them.
No, you got all three.
And so
Yeah.
this cannot be the final language, correct? Because they've got $0 for two of the pillars, correct?
Yeah, the historic.
No,
So on the set asides, if you have enough requests that you're going to fund, and it's 10% or more, you don't have to put anything into the set aside.
Okay.
So in other words, if you are doing window preservation, and that happens to be 10% like on H1, there's no H2, so I don't know why that's H1, E1, but anyway, that's historic. So if that is above your 10%, you don't have to put anything on into the set aside that year.
Okay.
Now, you can always elect to if you felt like it, but you don't need to. Same for open space and affordable housing. So if they're above their 10%, then you don't need to do that. So the set aside is really saying, okay, I have a historic preservation this year is only 5%. I need to make up that 5% delta. And then that 5% will go in the historic set aside fund. And if any of the years that money got turned back and you fell below that threshold, in those particular years, you'd have to appropriate that to the set-aside fund as recapture.
So they probably have their numbers. If you look at the appropriations, the community housing program is 147,000 and the housing authority is 162,000. That's probably 10%.
Yeah.
Open space was 450,000, so that's clearly makes it. And it looks like the Ironwork Farm, the bell tower preservation, and the Ace Parlin House will probably get them to where they need to be on historic. These could be the final numbers.
I think they're pretty close to the final numbers.
I'm good with everything but the Ace Parlin House, to tell you the truth. And, you know, and my objection there is what they plan to do has been proposed before. And when it was proposed before, it was a more complete proposal because they actually had a purpose for preserving it. This time, they're proposed to spend $175,000 to preserve a building, and they have no stated use for it. And they say, we'll put together a committee and come up with a use for it. And like I said, several years ago, they did the same thing. And when they added the second piece of the puzzle, it added another, what, throwing $300,000-$400,000 to the project.
Yeah, easily. And this one, they
so it's like we're getting the, I won't call it a bait and switch, but we're being asked to do something without knowing the whole picture. It's kind of like acquiring a piece of land without having a use for it.
It's also, this one, they are showing that there is holes to the side of the building now where little critters can get in there, maybe big critters, I don't know.
Last time we were in there were more than little critters in there.
Yeah. I pointed out the concerns that you and I had from being down in the basement that time and the water infiltration, et cetera.
Is this the little orange house in the basement?
Yeah.
Yeah. The little,
why are we trying to save this house?
Because they went to the Historic Commission to tear it down, and the Historic Commission said, no, you can't, it's historic property. Now, it's historic for the old part of the house, but not really the add-ons that have been added on over the years.
And if we choose to do nothing and it falls over, then we don't have a problem with the Historic Commission?
Well, if after it falls over, that's correct. This is down at that point. So, I mean, I would recommend that we
Kinda like
approve
the
it, and
admin
this
building?
maybe, but not approve J, which is the Asa Parlin House preservation. If that's the will of the committee, I can see that.
Yes.
Could you speak a little to the bell tower preservation?
Yeah,
That's
so
a private property, correct?
it is private property, it's a historic building. Whenever they do a work to something like that, like Exchange Hall, where they painted it many years ago, we didn't pay for the painting, we paid for some rehab of the shell of the building. They have to have a historic, they have to have it becomes deed restricted to the town. So this one is they want to restore that bell tower, and they came with a lot higher proposal, and the CPC said no.
This is
So-
the condominium, just for everyone who doesn't know, this is the old church in South Acton that's right on Main Street. That is
Correct.
condominiums now. It used to have the music school with the treble clef and
Right, that's exactly where it is. So it's restoring that bell tower so that bell tower doesn't further deteriorate and collapse. And that they feel that it's iconic to the town, being an old historic, being the whole church, and that's the character of the town. So personally, I feel that condominium owners there do not put enough into their condominium fees to support something like this. I would agree with that. You know, I mean, and that's kind of where the committee was a lot of it too. They said they'd help restore the structure, but not pay for the painting and the caulking and the stripping of the paint and all this stuff. It's just the actual shoring up of the bell tower so it doesn't collapse. And then they'd have to give a deed restriction if their condominium association said, we're not gonna do that, then they don't get the funding.
What would the deed restriction do?
It's a, maybe Steve can explain that a little better than I can, just losing the train of thought. So basically, it gives the town the right. It's kind of hard to explain. I don't know.
Well, it becomes, it goes on their deed as basically a historic site, and it has to be maintained.
Yeah, that's
As
basically what it does.
By
They-
them.
Yeah,
By them.
bonds them to do that and to maintain that piece of property. The town could step in if they feel that the owners of the property are not doing that. And basically force them, they can take them to court.
There's, Exchange Hall was one, the Powers Gallery was another.
Another one.
Powers Gallery,
Acton Women's Club,
Acton ones, yeah, when, this has been done on private property.
Theater
In
3.
the past.
Is it the whole site that is historic, or is it just the
bell
bell
site
tower?
goes-
It'd be the whole site that would reply to. Theater 3 is another one, West Acton Baptist Church is another one.
Try and stay off the religious ones. I gotta
Yeah,
say.
but it's just, there's a bunch of them that within the town that we do have historic, have a deed restricted against, so
But
it's.
if they're not maintaining it now,
That would be the problem, yeah.
That's exactly the problem.
The property owners would be okay with this?
As far as the CPC knows right now.
If they pay for it, they would be okay with it.
Right.
What they're not okay with is fixing it up themselves, which
Right.
they're obligated to do now.
But it makes it very difficult for them to ever sell the property in the future.
And here's the difference,
Let them up the
on
way.
Exchange Hall, the owner put in more than we did.
A lot more.
Improvements on Powers Gallery, the owners put in way more than we did, you know?
Theater 3.
You know, Theater 3, the same thing. It was, this sounds more like we're putting up the money,
Yeah,
and they're not.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the final numbers on that, and
this approval, it's all, we have line item approval, or we gotta do everything or nothing?
On this one, well, it'll be taken up line item by line item by the moderator. Usually there's a recommended, not recommended slot after every one of these. Because
Is it
it's
not?
happened in the past that people didn't recommend all the articles as a blanket.
So we can
Yeah.
play this one of two ways. We can either register our position on individual line items tonight, and since that will get printed in the warrant as such, or we can defer this and speak from the floor at the time of the meeting. How would people like to proceed?
Could you please repeat the first option? I'm really
The
tired.
first option is we pull out the things that we do not recommend, and make sure that it is written under the recommend, not recommend line. We make it clear what we recommend and what we don't recommend. Or we can defer this for if there's any further conversation we need to do. But it sounds like we pretty much have our mind made up on here. It's just going to be a fun motion that you need to make there, Mr. Borden. How would you, since you're the assignee on this article, how do you wish to proceed on this?
I wouldn't mind if we made a motion to approve and hold out the Asa Parlin House,
Line J.
line J, and
Aye.
I and J.
Okay.
Go for it.
If everyone is okay with that, yeah, okay. Roll.
So the motion is to approve the community
Recommend.
preservation
Motions to recommend.
article number 11 as printed in the draft warrant
Yes.
article, with the removal of line items I and J under the spending appropriations.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Anyone else want to discuss this further? Are we good to go? We're good to go. All those in favor of approving, recommending, even though I said it, recommended the CPC direct appropriation from fund balances without line items I and J, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we got one opposed. Any abstentions? Okay, now Roland, I and J.
I recommend that, I motion that we, at this time, due to the lack of further information, we do not recommend line items I and J under Article 11 of the CPC, warrant article as printed in the draft. That should be the Mill Place Condominium Association Bell Tower Preservation and the Town of Acton Asa Parlin House Preservation.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion to not recommend I and J, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? You good with that, Christie? Excellent, okay. So we are done with Article 11. Article 12 is on the list, transfer real property 53 River Street. Who has this?
No one.
No one? Is this brand new?
This is the new one.
Oh no.
Well, let's look at it real quick.
What article number?
12.
That didn't look that familiar.
Page 36.
We need John.
Yeah, I think it says another project where they have no idea what to do with it.
Well, we just approved them spending some money on it
Because we had no choice.
because they're gonna spend appropriate $75,000 to gather information on future use for the parcel as a park.
So this places a restriction on it to be either open space, historic, or recreation.
Right, okay, actually, I did speak to somebody in the town about this, in town management about this. This is to actually limit, so removing the general municipal purposes
Yeah.
and so it's removing housing as an option
Right.
for this article. So this was,
We discussed
And,
this.
we discussed this?
Or maybe this is part of a selectmen's meeting.
and was that ever
Sorry,
potentially?
I forget which one I had. But, yeah, it was
we removed that, right?
discussed at the last, at
Purpose
two
of-
selectmen's meetings ago.
Mr. Chairman.
So the question that was just spoken to me, I'll get to you in just a second. The question that was just spoken to me is, does this remove the option of it being parking? And the question is, would parking qualify as recreation purposes? Does anyone know?
Not if you're going to work.
But open space,
Would not qualify as open space if
I
you
believe
put
it
tarmac
would
down.
eliminate parking.
So it'll also eliminate parking.
Also, I think because they're not putting housing here, and the plan is now recreational, it means, one more example, where we bought the land, we will never get our money back.
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah.
I would like to know whether this means,
Sorry, I need to go to Dave first.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, the Finance Committee does not recommend this article.
Is there a second?
Second.
Let's discuss it further. Christie, you had something you wanted to say?
I was curious about if anyone knows what this would do regarding the, Roland knows about this, the dam that we have to fix.
We still are on the responsibility to fix the dam
Does
because
it
we
mean we
own
have
the
to
land.
fix it more if we turn it into a park?
Well, the dam is problematic. They said the state didn't even know that there was a dam there. So we brought it to their attention. Now that they know that it's a dam, you have to fix it, which is a big, expensive problem.
Yep.
So the appropriation in that last article includes funding for the dam breach feasibility study, conceptual design for the dam breach or removal, which they have to do if they were gonna turn it into a park.
Well, I think they have to do it no matter what.
Well, that's not necessarily true. It says it's a class 2, potential dam that has been found to be in unsafe condition. The report recommends a dam breach or removal. Breach or removal is more cost effective than rehabilitation or replacement. So it's unclear if they have, anyway.
So the only thing that I'll say is,
More money.
I like the idea of taking the housing restriction off, actually, because I don't want to turn this into 16 units of housing.
16 school kids.
Exactly. So while I am resigned to the fact that we're never going to get our money back on this unless we sell it, I kind of, if we're going to own it, I kind of like the idea of not having housing on it.
I think
Yes, sir.
a much more elegant way to solve that problem would be to let the CPC reimburse the town of Acton $875,000 for a piece of property the town should never have bought in the first place.
Well, that's the purpose of the restrictions they put on it, for use of these things, which are qualifying events for the CPC. That's why they picked
Well,
those.
why would the town itself want to restrict anything to be done with it? They want the least restrictions as possible.
Well,
So he might be he might have a
That's what-
point here. If by putting these restrictions on, it then becomes available to be taken over by CPC.
That's what.
Maybe. I
That's
mean,
what.
But we don't know that.
No, but
We
that's
don't know
what
that.
was discussed. That was discussed at the selectmen's meeting. That was the reason behind their
Well, then this article
restrictions.
should
The
state
second,
that. It
the
could-
second piece was, notwithstanding students, that you don't want to have apartments. They did a bunch of work and found out that because of floodplain and everything else, and it couldn't be senior housing because it wasn't convenient for seniors. And every group that looked at it, including some architects that they had, came to the conclusion that the last thing you'd want to put on there was residences. So then, given that, they changed it.
Why do you need an article to do that?
Well, because, you know,
if it's not
they were just-
feasible.
And then there was a whole bunch of discussion about where the money was going from one pocket to the other, but it was pointed out that these three limits were.
Okay. I don't feel that we have enough information to make an informed judgment at this time. If it is indeed the will of the Board of Selectmen to have this occur so that they can be eligible for CPC funding, I would like to hear that directly from them. At this time, I feel that we should defer this.
We have a motion.
We have a motion.
We have a motion to not recommend.
No recommendation?
Well, even housing would be eligible for CPC. I mean, it's always been eligible for
And you could
CPC.
tie the two
Yeah,
together.
but they,
I mean,
I was at the selectmen meeting, that was the discussion, that's the reason they did it, and they wanted to take off housing from the table, and they wanted to make it eligible for CPC reimbursement.
but
So-
as we just went through the CPC, housing, open space, recreation are all eligible categories.
I know.
So what does this have to
Wait,
do
wait,
with
wait,
anything?
wait, let him finish. Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm hoping I'm not quoting it wrong, but I was sitting in the audience on your behalf, and when this came up, they were recommending open space, recreation, historic, because they had studies, the different groups that reported back to them said, absolutely don't use this for housing. And then the discussion was, we made a bad decision, can we at least get some money back, cash flow, by having CPC get it from maybe a park, you know, a walk along the river, those kinds of things. And they said, great, let's limit the use for those non-residential purposes and commercial purposes, and that's why they supported it.
Well, frankly, I don't care whether we don't recommend or defer, but I would never recommend the article. It makes no sense to me.
Well, and if that was their plan to CPC buy it, let's just tie the two together and put in anything. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. You were there. I mean, it sounds reasonable. At the end of the day, it's like the prior article was CPC spending $75,000 to say, what do we do with this? And we had talked at one point about this, could this be parking for the train station? And it's not an unreasonable distance from that, but the comment was made by Peter, I think, at the time that you should go to the meetings that we're talking about this property, you could express your interest there. And at the end of the day, I don't see anything here that says the town will get $875,000 back from CPC funds. It just says we want to limit the town's use of this property. That's all this article says to me.
Right.
And that's why, I mean, I don't think we want to do that. It's just how I'm reading it. There could be a comprehensive plan around it that I'm just not aware of.
Okay. So we do have a motion that has been seconded. All those in favor of not recommending this article, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I got one opposed, that's Jeff is opposed. Any abstentions? Okay.
Just as a aside, somebody mentioned the dam. It was purported at the meeting that it would be like $500,000 to breach the dam. I guess there's no requirement that we maintain the dam, and it would be millions to fix it and keep it in its usable form. So
Sounding alarm downstream and let her rip.
put on the siren.
Okay. Number 13, I should not do numbers just in case. Disposition of real property, 348 to 364 Main Street. Mike, we did not finish this last week, correct?
No, we approved it, I
Yeah, wait, I'm sorry.
Did we? Are we sure about this?
Nah, I don't think we voted it.
Now, we may not have voted it because were we missing numbers? That was the main thing.
Is this the worst written summary you've ever seen?
There is no summary. They still don't have the numbers in it, that's why.
Property, right?
This is the Walker property.
Oh, is he brought, yeah.
This should say something like, request permission to
That's why
give
we
away
didn't.
$2 million worth of taxpayers' money on a boondoggle.
Okay, so in the interest of time, because we are running wicked late, we still don't have numbers on this. We're going to pass over to this, and it's not going to make it in time for printing.
Well, can we just defer? If we leave it blank, do we get printed deferred in here? Or do we have to make a motion?
Yes. No. If we don't vote on it at all, it comes up as deferred because there's
Okay.
yes.
They
Because
were
I
not
think there is a
consistent in these drafts in doing so.
That's okay.
But
okay.
Want to make sure.
Moving on.
Dot the i's.
Land acquisition.
I would like to ask the chairman to make sure that this is not the final language of the warrant article.
Give me homework. Okay, I will go talk to Mark and the Board of Selectmen on this
I
one.
would like some information.
Okay.
I have 14, and we do not have information to make a vote, so I
Selectmen
move
defer.
we defer.
Okay.
Okay, fine. 15, 257 Central Street.
Aha, so this is the,
Board didn't recommend.
this is
We have to vote.
the landowner, this is a piece of property that the owners have already by right divided the property into two pieces, and they have a purchase and sale, I assume, with the developer, who is by permit asking to be able to put a duplex on that piece of property. The ZBA met last night, and the planning board people gave enough input to the ZBA and the developer that they've deferred final recommendation of whether they'll grant that permit or not to April 8th. So there will be no decision on whether this is buildable as a duplex or not by town meeting. There is another duplex in the neighborhood, tastefully done. The owner and developer were all at the meeting asking for the permit to be issued. I see no reason why this shouldn't be a tastefully developed duplex in that community. And so my motion is that we do not recommend Article 15.
Article 15?
Yeah, which is to buy this property. There's no,
Or 257 Main Street?
yeah, 257. We don't know what the price would be. The owner and the developer put a lot of money into the plans and the permitting process, so it would be quite an expensive proposition, I think, at this time. So,
Okay, so he has moved that we not recommend. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay, my question on this is it possible that the ZBA comes back on April 8th and says this is not permittable? We're not gonna allow this,
well, they can always build a house on it.
but they would not be able to build a duplex.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But it doesn't, I can't say where they're leaning or not.
I understand that you can't say which way they're leaning, and you're not a member of the board, so you don't get to vote. But the
Well, given it doesn't have any money in it, so we don't know. And our policy is never to support something as a blank check. And given that there's so much money invested already, I would think that it would be quite an expensive lot to buy.
It's a citizen's.
And then we'd have to develop it.
It's a citizen's petition. The Board of Selectmen said no. Why should we say anything but no?
Well,
You know.
very well. Any other conversation on this topic? All those in favor of the not recommended motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Moving on. Commuter lot and station maintenance, which I believe is number 18. Mr. Willinghoff.
Yeah, so, this is a little cleaned up, but, essentially, this is just the commuter lot budget. As you can see, they added, transfer to transportation line item here for $121,000. The rest of it, the $77,000 for the FY20 budgeted expense is generally routine maintenance, which includes maintaining the station, the parking lot, and then they got some fees and so on associated with the prior budget expense included a $90,000 capital outlay, so there's some unusual items in there, but as it's written here, I think it's pretty straightforward and representative of just normal operating sort of expenditures.
Excellent. May I have a motion?
Do I do that?
Yes.
A motion to recommend Article 18, commuter lot and station maintenance.
Second.
All those, any conversation? All those in favor of recommending commuter lot and station maintenance, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Christie, are you good? Number 19, septage disposal enterprise budget. Dave, to you again.
Similarly, this one's been updated since the original draft, but the budgeted FY20 expense is 120K salary, 15,000 purchase services, and 25,000 of benefits. I believe this represents a large septage fee increase that they put through over the last year's revenue number. But again, sort of in line numbers, just small variances. I didn't see anything they get too concerned about, so motion to recommend Article 19, septage disposal enterprise budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, any conversation? All those in favor of recommending septage disposal enterprise budget, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Believe 20 was already taken care of. The transfer station and recycling enterprise budget, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
We're moving on to 21, sewer enterprise budget. Dave, this is what you get for not being at the last meeting. You get a bunch of them in a row. Is this also cookie cutter straightforward?
Yeah, it is. Another enterprise fund, just a couple line items, and to reiterate, I think some of what Brian touched on earlier, the FY20 budgeted expense, $830,000 is the treatment plant operations. Debt is around $908,000. There's a capital request here, which is not shown here. That's probably the most interesting item of this. Is there's a $225,000 capital request to fund a West Acton preliminary design study, and as far as I understood it last from Paul and company, that they may strip that line item out and it could be a separate item in the budget, just to have it stand on its own merit. But for those of you who aren't aware, the West Acton Sewer Group is discussing whether to sewer West Acton, as you guessed from the title of the group, and cost of it was $225,000. So anyways, other than that, the FY19 expenses had a few individual capital items, as Brian alluded to earlier, leaching field expansion, long-term capital plan expenses. But all in all, I think the line items here are relatively straightforward. And again, Brian sort of stepped us through where we are up to Q2. And I thought I had some numbers in Q3, but I don't think I have them in front of me. So I'm making a motion to recommend Article 21 to the Untitled budget.
Second.
Any conversation? Jeff?
Just in that, I think I remember at the selectmen meeting, there was a whole bunch of discussion about why should the current sewer payers support studies for future payers. And that may be a bone of contention at town meeting. I think that they're being perhaps a little short-sighted. Some people before them helped them get their sewer in, because the town actually did spend a lot of money getting them. So they were really subsidized coming into their sewers. And secondly, if it goes to West Acton, then some of their fees will go down in terms of some of the economy of scale things that they'll derive benefit from. So, I'm in favor of this, but I just thought it prudent to bring up to your attention that.
Yeah, and just super briefly, the treatment center has had a lot of excess capacity added in the beginning, which now is going to be utilized. And there's a lot of puts and takes to all the benefits and who's been paying and so on. And then there's, just FYI, there's on March 14th, there's an outreach forum, which would be the most interesting because there's already been regular attendees at the meeting who are pushing back on the idea and the cost and so on and so forth. And there's a certain amount of town general benefit that the town would look to pay for that wouldn't be covered by betterment and so on and so forth. So we can get into all that down the road, but I agree completely with you. It's very political, sensitive subject, and there's a lot of puts and takes. So.
And this is just the capital expense is just the study. It's not a commitment in any way, right?
It's a preliminary design study, and to be fair, I mean, my sense is, I don't want to get ahead of the group at all, but I think there was a project 15, the Spencer Tuttle Flint area. There's just a lot of pushback on these types of projects from local residents and so on. So I think 225 now, which may be its own warrant article, will give us a lot of new information to discuss a $14 million project, and we can, and there's a lot of complications about whether it ties into schools, the twin school design, and whether that school could be self-sustaining, whether it even needs sewers, and so on. So it's a big topic, but yeah, absolutely. This is not a commitment to do anything, but just do a preliminary design and a little bit of other sort of estimation work.
Okay. Any other conversation?
Just a question, if you look at the fund balance here in the blocks, it went from $1.3 million at 18 to 900,000, 630.19 to 560,000 estimated for 2020. If you extrapolate that, it's going to go to zero in a year or two. Is that a concern? I mean, what level fund should we have for an enterprise like this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we chatted about was just the rate increase that they're putting through, so the revenue should start seeing a little bit of boost, but I don't know what the history is. Maybe Brian has a little more background on it, but your concern is right. If it's going down 300,000-400,000 a year, I mean, this can't go on another couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, so to kind of give you a little bit of history there, so for a number of years, the rate holders were having part of their annual rate setting was a calculation for capital assessment component of it, because we knew at some point in time that, with wear and tear in the system, would have to have some kind of capital reserves in there, so if there was a problem, pump station went down or there was issues, would have that money set in that reserve account. Also, just general maintenance and across the board. So Corey York, who's now taken over sewers from Doug Cowley, and Doug Cowley retired, so Corey in the engineering department now was kind of overseeing this. Corey's concern was that going forward now, he wants to make sure he has enough money in this budget to accommodate any issues during the course of the year if they come up, that he has that funding in place. So what he's doing is we had a couple of studies in here which is pulling down the fund balance, but he's also drawing down some of the fund balance because he wants the appropriation annually in case there's a situation that comes up. So you might see on paper that fund balance coming down, but I'm not sure the reality of it once the fiscal year ends at 6/30, whether he's actually going to be using that or not. It's kind of there as a safety net right now. He needs that spending cap, if you would, because if he goes beyond that, you'd have to call a special town meeting and go back and ask to increase that spending cap. So it's kind of there as a safety net. But you gotta remember, most of this infrastructure has been put in place,
20 years ago.
yeah, close to 20 years ago now. So, we're trying to prepare for anything that may come up. And so that's kind of the plan right now.
Any other conversation on this? The motion was to recommend it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? I abstain. I don't feel like I understand this enough to weigh in on it.
Yeah, no shit about it.
Literally. Very, very punny. Ambulance enterprise budget, Ms. Russell.
So we finally have the numbers in front of us, and they are about a $68,000 increase in appropriations from the previous year. This is, I guess, the only enterprise fund that is subsidized by general revenue, and the ask this year is, despite the increase, actually $60,000 less than it was last year. So the receipts are up, and this continues to be going in the right direction.
Okay, and it's going up in the right direction because of the advanced ALS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Motion.
Motion to recommend the ambulance enterprise budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, gonna give that one to Mike. All those in, any further conversation on this topic?
Just a question to Brian. Do you think this will ever be self-sustaining?
It's a good question, Mike. I think right now, going with ALS clearly is giving us a bump on the revenue side, so I think that's helped to offset some of that general fund subsidy. As you see this year, we're asking for $180,000 in the past. It was as high as $271,000, so we're seeing it come down a little bit. We'll monitor it. It's going to take maybe a couple of 3 years or so to see how ALS is responding to this, and then it's payer mix as well. A lot of this is Medicare reimbursements on ambulance runs, but it's also private insurance. So it's a fairly complex model, but we'll continue to monitor it. And the idea is, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get it. It's not going to require a general fund subsidy, but clearly we're pointing in the right direction.
A lot of that revenue used to go to Emerson. Now it comes to us.
Okay. Any other conversation? The motion on the floor is to recommend this ambulance enterprise budget. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Moving on to transportation enterprise budget. Ms. Anderson, to you.
This is a 9+% increase due to contractual services, which looks like it's for the various types of transportation that we have. Do you know what those are? I haven't been able to get in touch with. I mean, I know what the breakdown is, but
Yeah, John has.
was there a
Some of that cost, I believe, is associated with Transact, who actually handles the dispatch services for this budget. Also, part of that increase is gasoline, which has not been expended out of this budget. It was coming out of the highway budget, so we figured it was appropriate to put the true expense in the enterprise fund.
Okay.
So that's the bulk of it. So it's contractual service, and it's really gasoline to run our buses.
And how often do the contracts get renegotiated?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Yeah, it ends up getting in touch with Doug is a little hard right now.
Motion.
Motion to recommend.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I heard Roland loudest. All those in favor, any further conversation on this topic?
Yeah, thank goodness Margaret's not here.
Okay. I do not have a pause button for you. We are recorded. Okay, very well. All those in favor of recommending this article, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Very well. Moving on to accepting legislation, Agricultural Commission, Mass General Law, C14, S8L. Ms. Pruitt, to you.
Can I do the 25 and the 26 together?
By all means, just make two separate motions when you're done.
Okay. So I'll just run through some quick facts. This will not be creating anything new. We are just adopting what the state law already exists that protects farming, and for allowing creation of an agricultural commission. The same Acton zoning laws and health laws will remain intact. And if there is a complaint from a resident or a farm abatter, they are free to make it, and the complaints will always be fairly heard, but like it is right now by the Acton Board of Health and the Planning Board. The citizens will not lose any rights on this. And currently in Acton, zoning, farming is allowed in every zoning district. So, having said that, right now in Acton we have 26 farms with an average of 12.5 acreage. And that is a total of 327 acres. And out of that we have about 156 of total crop land, and 17 horse farms, 2 livestock, and 8 crop farms. And this particular, the right to farm is adopted in all the neighboring towns. Every single town surrounding us already has adopted this law. There were a couple of concerns that I heard from residents. One of the questions was, what happens if someone buys a house or a piece of property and doesn't know that there is a farm that exists next door? And so the answer was, even if the right of farming goes into effect, a homeowner who buys unaware of the agricultural activity will still be able to take his or her complaints to the local officials, staff, and the Agricultural Commission if we end up creating one. So nothing changes, basically everything is kind of the same, and it will be dealt in the way it is being dealt right now. And according to the BOS, the Board of Selectmen, we haven't seen any of such complaints arising in the past decade. And the other concern was, what if the Chapter 40, Section 3 appears to allow someone to conduct agricultural pursuits in wetland areas? And that is not true. I think the answer is the town of Acton has already dealt with this kind of a situation with Idlewild Farm before, and nobody can actually alter the wetland to even perform agricultural production in that area.
So why is this being moved forward? Why is this being brought up now?
That's a good question, because that's exactly what I asked. And it's one of those things that was talked about probably a few years ago, and it never went through. There was not enough people to take on this effort. Right now, I think they have enough staff and people looking into it where they can form an agricultural commission at this point. So they do have some members who are interested and who have looked into it.
Is there anything tangibly gained or tangibly lost in doing this?
No, there is nothing that we will lose. And the other question is this of any concern to the FinCom? And certainly not, even if there is any land that is proposed to be bought for agricultural uses, it has to go through the CPA, and we have the right to actually approve or not approve such a purchase. So it goes by case basis at that point. So it's not of any concern to FinCom at this point, other than giving benefits to farmers and having a control of a group in town which is called the Agricultural Commission. So it's easier for farmers to approach the group. And the state gives some benefits for farmers if we are a right to farm community.
That's in our purview then.
Jeff?
I was just curious, as always want to try and simplify things, and we're going to add another board, and paperwork, and I mean, if there are rights currently for farmers and people who may have objections about the farm, why add another layer of complexity? I think we have post watchers and some other things that come from way back. Somebody's got to walk the order of the town or something. I mean, it just seems strange that that we'd be addressing this unless, of course, this marijuana thing about, growing
planted in
marijuana,
there.
I thought, maybe this is
Right
an
in
attempt to, somehow people are confusing this and trying to understand how it relates, and that's why I wonder if that's why it's currently being discussed. But I don't know how they intersect.
Yeah, I might have the answer to that. What I was told was right now there is nothing protecting the farmers, and so if the town adopts this law, the right to farm law, they get some benefits. I do not know exactly what those benefits are, but they're all in here. Not right off my head, but they do get some concessions from the state, which makes it easier for the next generation of farmers to continue to do farming, which is kind of disappearing. And in the process, I was told that, this is a way to preserve open space, because these little farms are kind of disappearing over time because they're not able to maintain them. So if they get the benefits from the state, they will be able to, it's an incentive for them to maintain these lands.
I wish I knew what those, are they exempt? For example, there are taxes for the town. You would know this. Do they get a special deal on valuation of the property if they put restrictions that it's a farm? I thought there was something that...
There's restrictions now, Jeff, under Chapter 61, 61A, and 61B. 61 being agriculture, horticulture, where instead of being paid, they get reduced assessment, meaning that if they are actively farming a minimum of 5 acres, their assessment may be anywhere from $40 to $2,000 per acre. There's a tax lien that's placed on the property, so if they were to change that use, the town has a right of first refusal, they could buy it, and there's also a penalty, what they call a rollback tax, and that rollback tax goes back for 5 years, so the town does have the ability to recoup some of that lost revenue.
But this doesn't change any of this. This doesn't change any of this.
No, it doesn't, but I'm just
This
trying to
is-
understand.
This has nothing to do with this.
So I
That's
don't
a
know
whole
what
separate
the,
provision, but
I'm
that's-
trying to understand, I'm enough skeptic that I'm trying to, when somebody says it doesn't change anything, but.
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, so why are we doing it?
Why are we
Right,
doing it?
yeah.
If there's no problem, why are we solving
So what's the
it?
impetus of bringing it
Yeah,
forward?
So and it adds another layer of board. I don't know.
If there's no problem, that means there's a problem.
Yeah, there's something there, and I just don't know what it is. What?
I smell emotion over there.
Sahana, do you have a motion?
Can I make a motion?
You just can't vote on it.
Yeah, vote on it.
I just make a motion. I make a motion to accept legislation to create an agricultural.
To recommend.
Recommend or not recommend?
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
This is the Agricultural Commission?
Yes.
Second.
Okay. Any further conversation on this?
I don't feel that we should make any recommendation on the Agricultural Commission. It's not a financially relevant decision.
I agree.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor, and it is seconded. All those in favor of recommending this article, please say aye.
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 Okay. Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, any abstentions? Okay, so we do not have a
You don't have a recommendation.
we do not have a recommendation at this time. Is there another motion on the floor?
The next motion is.
No.
We gotta fix.
We gotta finish this one.
Started it, Christine.
I move that we take no position, make no recommendation on the Agricultural Commission article.
Second.
Any further conversation on this? I think there is an impact to the town for the right to farm declaration. But the Agricultural Commission is this one, right? So
Yes.
that's the second one?
The first one is the Agricultural Commission.
The first one's the Agricultural Commission, which has no impact, no financial impact that we can see on the town,
Yes.
whereas the Right to Farm Declaration is the next one, and that does have an impact theoretically.
Yes.
Although I think, Mr. Chairman, if we, in order for 26 to be approved, we need to have 25. I'd have to find that exactly, but I think you need to
Yeah.
have the commission
Really?
in order to have the right to farm.
Really?
I thought I read that, so bear with me. I didn't highlight it.
That sounds unconstitutional.
Tell you what I thought I read. Yeah, Dave
Motion to
got it.
adjourn.
This is section 5, resolution of disputes and right to farm. The section shall only apply if the town of Acton has established an agricultural commission in accordance with MGL.
Oh.
Okay. So,
I assume that we are going to defer on the right to farm simply because we do not have a great enough understanding of it to have a financial opinion, in which case making no recommendation on the first article does not hurt or help the deferred action. I could be wrong, but that's my assumption.
Defer on both.
Well, it says clearly in section 1A that the purpose and intent of this bylaw is simply to state with emphasis the right to farm already accorded to all citizens of the Commonwealth. It's not that.
I strenuously object.
okay, so we
Getting late in the
have,
night to take up these.
we have,
Propose it, but I
we have a motion on the floor to take no action on accept legislation, Agricultural Commission. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. All those who abstain, say me.
Me.
Did you catch all that, Christie? Or do you need to go over it again?
I think I'm good. If I could clarify something on the previous vote?
Yes, you may. Clerk absolutely has a privilege.
I have that Mike and Steve both said aye. Did anyone else? No, Tahani, you weren't in that?
She can't vote.
You can't? Okay. Never mind. Okay. I'm comfortable then.
So what was the result of this? This was,
25.
so what was the result, Christie, of what we just did?
As to my understanding, we just moved and approved no recommendation for article to accept legislation for the Agricultural Commission.
Yes.
Did we really?
yeah.
How many people voted on that? I missed it.
You voted in favor.
No, I abstained.
I abstained.
I abstained on,
No.
You didn't abstain
on
vocally.
accept legislation. I absolutely said abstain, say
I
me.
abstained.
You said,
Me.
say me, but
Say
then
me.
you didn't
And you
say
And we
me.
both said me.
Okay.
Well,
I
yeah,
only heard
Steve.
Mr. New.
So we're doing, so let's be clear about it. We're gonna vote it again. All those in favor of taking no action, no recommendation on 25, please raise your hand.
What are we doing? I'm sorry.
We're
We're
re-voting.
voting on.
No, but this is no recommendation.
Yes.
This is no
Okay.
recommendation. This is a no recommendation
I
vote.
just want to make sure my hands are
Okay,
correct.
so that's that.
Yeah.
Now, who says no to this one? Nobody said no? Okay, that shows you what I remember. And the abstentions are
Okay, thank you.
Swear
there.
to God, you didn't make a noise.
I absolutely said say me, me.
You did say me, but then.
And then I said me. Okay, we're getting punchy at this point.
Yes, we are.
Okay, 26 is the actual right to farm one. Do I have a motion for the actual right to farm declaration?
I motion that we take no action.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, no recommendation, sorry.
Yeah.
Good enough.
All those in favor of taking no recommendation, please raise your hand because it's getting late. Okay, that's everybody except for me. All opposed say nay. All who abstain say abstain. I'm abstaining on this one too. Okay, so we recommended that one as well.
We did not.
We took no action. No recommendation.
No recommendation on those two.
No recommendation.
God. Okay, you know what?
Do we need to push the rest?
We're pushing the rest of these because we've got other things we have to take care of, so we're not gonna. Now, actually, before we push the rest of them, are there any of these that we absolutely feel that we need to make sure that our printed opinion is made, because we need to go over them now? So I'm gonna open up to, Christie, I saw your hand first.
I would like to have written opinions about turning lanes
I
and the
think
intent to purchase Kmart.
we did turning lanes last time. We really did. And it has even been printed in the,
I have down that we,
we did not do Kmart.
not do Kmart.
We did
Yes.
not do Kmart because I wanted to speak to the town, I wanted to speak to town council and get their opinion about if what had been asserted by the petitioner was real.
could we,
Did you?
Just a second.
could we
Yes.
confirm, hold on, let me check my notes. I just want to make sure on the vote, if we could revote, that would help, maybe.
Well, I want to
The
make
turning lanes, if I don't have the numbers down.
I've got in my notes from our last meeting, we were going to defer that until you got a legal opinion.
That was
The turning lanes.
turning lanes, not,
Same article number, different article.
yeah,
Yes.
non-binding resolution, do not add turning lanes.
Page before.
Not recommended.
Yes.
Does anyone have the vote?
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have that on here.
Okay.
It's late, okay?
Very good. Very good. I thought we had taken care of that one last week.
Corrected.
Okay, so I have interest in discussing 38. Is there, just before we do discuss 38, are there any other articles in particular that people want a printed answer on?
What's the rest of it?
40 and 41 or 30 seconds each.
I would like to hear about those.
Okay, so 38, 40, and 41. Any others that people would like to discuss tonight?
Well, 53 is just housekeeping.
Okay,
Virtually everything we got left is consent.
It's all consent.
okay.
Are we meeting again next Tuesday?
At this rate, yes, we are.
Was on my calendar.
Unless
Yes,
we
we
want
are.
to push through.
No, we're not pushing through because we're already making mistakes.
How long do consent
Okay,
articles take to push through?
Not long, but longer than we probably have.
okay, so we're going to go ahead and forward to non-binding resolution, register intent to purchase the Kmart parcels. We did hear from the petitioner during our last meeting. I asked the committee's consent to wait until till I had done my homework and spoken and heard back from the town council as to whether or not the mere intent of purchasing a property would be enough to thwart any 40B developers. And the answer that I got back was that only the outright ownership or an eminent domain taking will actually stop a 40B development. So the mere intent, as written in this article, does not stop the clock. Was that the only outstanding piece of information that people needed to hear before we could take up this article? Okay, therefore, since this is mine to discuss, I move that we do not recommend the non-binding resolution, register intent to purchase the Kmart parcels.
Second.
Any further conversation on this topic? All those in favor of not recommending this article, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? That was unanimous. Moving on to number 40, amend general bylaws, stormwater. Dave, to your very brief conversation on this topic.
Mostly 40 and 41, just sort of cleaning up make the verbiage consistent on their books. There didn't seem to be any material financial impact. The penalties and violations were they're small, very small in number. They generally try to work with the violators of these. I don't see really any financial impact after discussing with him, and I make a motion, we have no recommendation on Article 40, and I'll make the same for 41.
There is a motion to take no recommendation on amend general bylaws, stormwater.
Second.
Any conversation? There is no financial impact to this in any way, shape, or form?
I did not go through the entire bylaw. I mean, the way these articles are written is, hey, we're just adding this, and it could be in something that says, we're going to drop nuclear waste in your backyard through stormwater. I don't know what. So from what I read in the warrant article, I could not discern the financial impact.
Okay. Any other conversation on this? All those in favor of making no recommendation on this article, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Dave?
Motion to take no recommendation on Article 41, zoning bylaw stormwater.
Second.
Any conversation on this one? All those in favor of taking no recommendations, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Last opportunity. Anybody want to discuss anything else before we call it for the night?
Call it.
Okay, now you do not have a motion. We absolutely must move on to Finance Committee business as per the agenda. The first item on the Finance Committee business is we do have an open meeting law complaint filed against us with regards to the meeting minutes of the meeting of January 5th.
Budget Saturday again?
Budget Saturday. We did discuss a previous, actually, before we start, first action is we have to discuss this. Second thing is we have to assign a respondent. So I will be looking for a motion for the respondent here in a minute. The discussion of this is that we have already responded to a declaration that we had failed to do the appropriate minutes. It was discovered that minutes were filed under our name incorrectly. Those minutes, we then did pick up and officially vote on those minutes on February 15th. There was, however, some delay in getting the website changed. During that time, the complainant emailed me and the town at 5:02 a.m. on a Saturday, saying that he wanted a copy of the latest minutes. Being that it was a weekend, I did not have a chance to respond to it. Just past midnight on Sunday night onto Monday, this open meeting law complaint was filed. That does represent 0 minutes of business hours for which we could have responded to the point that we did indeed have voted and approved minutes, that they just had not made it to the website yet. It is my contention that this open meeting law complaint does not accurately reflect the actions of this committee, and therefore it will be my intention for us to respond saying we have no control, no direct immediate control over what was posted on the website, and that indeed we have met the obligations of the open meeting law by approving the minutes in a reasonable amount, within the prescribed amount of time.
And leave it at that.
And that's all I intend to say on the topic. Does anyone wish to discuss this further? Is there any conversation that people wish to make that speaks directly to this open meeting law violation, a complaint, and how anybody should respond accordingly?
I recommend we have Jason respond on behalf of the committee.
Is that a motion?
Is it a motion? Do I need a motion?
Say so moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of having me take the responsibility of responding to this open meeting law complaint, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
Attaboy.
For the simple reason of,
I don't think we need a motion for this.
That's a good reason.
very good. I believe that is all I need with regard to the open meeting law complaint. It is my intention to leave that item on the agenda in the future, just in case something comes in last minute. This had come in time for our previous meeting, but I didn't have it on the agenda in time, and I didn't want to play with it. So I'm just going to leave it on here, just like we leave minutes on here, even if we don't necessarily have anything to approve. Bringing us to the next item on the agenda. Do we have any minutes to approve?
No.
Very good. I love it quick. We have any liaison reports. We're going to start down at the end. Ms. Pruitt, do you have anything to report from a liaison perspective? Roland.
I have nothing.
Mr. Burgart.
No. Skip me, I gotta get my
Mr. Majors.
I sent you guys a video of progress for Minuteman. I hope you looked at it. Did you?
I have not yet, but I do want to find a Wednesday when I'm guaranteed to be in town so I can go on that tour. Okay, I'm not going to attempt your last name, Al. Do you have anything for us?
I have nothing.
Okay. Ms. Anderson.
The Mass DOT 25% design form for Kelly's Corner happened tonight. I have no idea what happened.
Excellent.
May still be going.
Steve.
Health Insurance Trust met last Friday. The revenues and expenses for 6 months were reviewed, and they're tracking as we had projected.
Very good. Christie?
School committee has not met since our last 2 meetings.
Tom?
Nothing to report? Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to not let you get to the last agenda item, motion to adjourn.
Ooh, wait,
Oh, no.
wait.
I still have the point of view outreach. Steve and I had.
Wait.
Wait.
We're not there yet either. Okay, do you have anything to report from a liaison perspective? Mr. Berger, do you have something quick, please?
I went through it, forget it. No, nothing substantive.
Okay, so wait, now there's mine that I'm trying to, there was an ALG meeting, I'm trying to find what I wanted to say about it. There we
Short and
go.
brief.
What's that?
It was short and brief.
It was exceptionally short and brief. That was a good thing. We heard most of everything from the school already. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, don't feel the need to say much about this. Okay, I'm done. Jeff, I just went to you because I'm already tired. Okay, very good. Now time to move on to the point of view outreach. Ms. Pruitt.
So the next one is on March 11th with the Gates PTO coming up, and that's Dave and Mike, who I have on the list here, and March 13th with Conan PTO, Jason and Tom, and March 18th McCarthy Tom with Christine and Christy, and 20th is the Rotary. So that would be the end of the outreach.
20th.
And Steve and I, Steve did the presentation to the Acton Chinese School, and we had a good.
Yeah, we had a good turnout.
Yeah, good turnout. And so that's something that we need to keep going forward with.
Excellent.
Do we have enough printouts of the point of view, or do I need to make some more copies?
I stuck about
I need
15 of them
I
in
need
the
like 2
mailbox.
dozen.
You need like 2 dozen? There's 15 in the mailbox currently, so you need some more.
Right, what mailbox and where?
In the town hall on the first floor, just past you'll walk all the way down past the clerk.
Make a left.
Make a left, hard left on the wall behind you, look for finance committee.
Oh,
And I try and check it on a regular basis and clean out the stuff, but we also can use that to hold the point of view documents. So I'm sorry to inform you, we will have a meeting next Tuesday because we have more of these to go through, and I do not want to run the risk of not getting to them at all before annual town meeting. Sorry to call it a little early tonight, but 10:45 is good enough for my ability to be coherent.
Yeah, point at that guy.
Yeah. Move to adjourn?
Do I have a second? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Please do not let the vapor trails get you on the way out the door.
You're not gonna let him say nay?